I got a special guest for you today, Mr. Nate, Nature Nate. We're going to be discussing Bovia geckos, one species I am absolutely not familiar with at all. They come from the islands, I guess, of
Yes.
New Caledonia, where my heart is. Clearly, anybody that knows me knows that I have about 200 New Caledonian geckos, all of them except for a few species, this being one of them. So I'm going to here to learn with you guys today, man. I'm super excited about this. Nate, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, your company, your business, what you got going on real quick?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me as a second
It's an
time
honor.
visitor, long time listener. Really
Honor.
enjoyed. You're I want to say it's the Polychris, the monkey tail Anole episode y'all just did was like fascinating. I actually keep them just for
Awesome, right?
fun.
Do you
I'm not an
really?
expert. Yeah, I have a pair.
That's cool. See,
Yeah, they're
you
wicked.
guys should come together, man. I don't think a lot. I was blown away when he was saying there's just a handful of people that have them and being such a cool
Yes.
species. Damn, that's good to
Yeah.
know. It's cool.
Yeah. So I'm Nate. I've been interested in. I started with insects and amphibians, and then made my way over. Started with a cresty, and then I've always been a diversity guy. I just
Mhm.
love a little bit of everything. I fish. I raise insects. I raise moths. I've got this like crazy plant room. Also, future podcast. That's a fish scale gecko set up over there, so we can talk about that someday.
Hell yeah.
And you just fell really, really hard in love with crested geckos because they were so easy. I love easy pets. And then it has slowly kind of become a side business now. This is the first year that I would say Nature Nate Geckos is, I mean, it's been profitable in before when I used to breed like mantises and beetles and stuff. But now, I'm breeding, it was like 10 new species last year. And every year I'm trying to add. So like this year really expanded into skinks. And kind of the common theme for a long time throughout my entire collection was, does it eat Pangea? If it ate Pangea, I wanted to keep it because I'm already making Pangea. It's just so easy for me. And almost everything I keep will eat Pangea. And so that's what got
That's
me
hilarious.
into, I got a crested gecko. It was a red bicolor. Eventually, heard about gargoyles. I was like, okay, the care is the same. Then I heard about Chihuahua, and like Chihuahua were amazing. I got a Yuri. And then from there, just naturally got into breeding. And then there was kind of like the past, I don't know, a couple of years where I really was just all about diversity. So I got pretty much everything that is in New Caledonia that we have in the hobby. And so that led me to the Botvaia. That's how I pronounce it. I'm not saying that that's the correct way.
How do you pronounce it? I'm sure I'm butchering it. How do you say
It's
it?
so it's definitely Latin, right? So
Mhm.
it's a dead language. So it's hard for anyone to say that they're right or wrong. I say Bavaia
Baba,
because
yeah,
that's
okay.
fun for me.
Okay.
But I think, yeah, if you, it's named after a guy, a researcher
Okay.
an explorer who visited New Caledonia, and so I'm sure there is a correct way that he said his name.
Hmm. What
He's
year?
dead.
Do you know? Do you have any idea on what year? A little bit of the history of when they were discovered or brought to the
Yeah, I,
states.
I don't have. I think, well, a lot of things were a lot of things were never formally described to science until Charles Linnaeus started the binomial nomenclature system, which was like I think in like the late 1800s. So a lot of things
Okay.
were formally described for the first time in the 1900s, right? So you may say like 1923, maybe even up or down of that, but I don't actually know the exact date. I don't know how to say it. I say Bavaria because it's
Okay.
fun for me and it rolls off the tongue.
Yeah.
And then there's also Diero gecko, which we can lightly touch on.
Okay.
And so yeah, they're really cool. They're like a morning gecko on steroids. And I prepared a couple photos courtesy of Google. For anyone watching the video podcast, you can see what some of the juveniles look like. And they really do look like a morning gecko. Some people call them a mini Chihuahua. But they act like a morning gecko in the sense that they are quick. They're kind of like a Sarah. They're not going to just like, can you hold them? Absolutely. I mean, you're seeing pictures of people holding them,
Hmm.
but there's something that you kind of have to work with, or like you have to anticipate. It's like I hold my day geckos, but I know they're going to run. I have to tilt my
Yeah.
hand. It's a anticipation thing.
How
And
big do
so
they actually get?
huge. So there's
Really?
so obviously there's just the crested gecko. With
Hmm.
Chihuahuas, there's like two species. With
Yeah.
lychees, there's really one species, but there's a ton of locales. Bovia are actually probably the most diverse genus in New Caledonia by species. There's at least 16 of them, different species.
Damn, that many. I thought 10, and I was like, that's a lot. 16.
And I
Wow.
believe they described like 5 to 10 new ones last year. So actually, the number might be closer to 20, right? And so what these guys
Amazing.
are, most of them are very small. We're talking morning gecko size. Some of them smaller or a little bit bigger, a little
Okay.
chunkier. The ones that I work with the most are Bavia robusta and robust,
Those are,
right?
okay, I know what
Large.
those are.
So they're the biggest ones, and the males of those can easily hit 40 grams, which is actually quite large. That's a cresty.
Crested gecko size. That's
Yes.
a
Yeah, and my breeding pair would be
wow.
like a small. Obviously, they don't have the head, so it's kind of hard to compare. But my breeding pair, the males get larger than the females. The male is probably 30 grams or more. He's large. They're not
That's a
tiny
good
geckos.
size gecko.
Yeah, and when they hatch out, they quickly hit morning gecko size, like pretty fast, maybe 6 months, less than a year, and then they hit full sexual maturity at about 2 or 3 years. And like I said, I mean, at that point, they're like, it would like a full grown male would be like here to here and about as
Mhm.
chunky, a little chunkier than like my main finger there. Yeah, and of course they're a sexual species, right? They're not morning geckos in the sense that they don't have males. They do
Uh-huh.
lay eggs. They're nowhere near as fecund as a crested gecko. Like I have a really hard time getting more than a couple eggs per year. I think they're laying them.
Really?
I'm just not getting to them, and they don't seem as inclined to use a lay box, which is kind of
Okay.
annoying. I also think I keep my room slightly drier than I'm really supposed to be, but watering takes forever. So I've been
Yeah.
experimenting with putting glass on top of the
Mhm.
tanks and trying to like keep the humidity. So if I find an egg late, I have a longer window to find the
Yeah.
egg. But they do have a lay box, and they live together year round, male and female, no problems. They love
Nice.
Pangea. They also love bugs. They're one of my most bug aggressive New Caledonian geckos by far. Like if I put a
Really?
cricket at the outside of the tube that they sit in together,
Mhm.
they will come all the way out and just nab it from tongs, which is really cool. If you're looking for a new cal that's a little bit more like a Chihuahua, a little bit more like a
Nice.
small monitor, right? You do that with a Cresty, they're probably not going to follow a cricket very
Yeah.
far.
How so? Being that there's that many species or subspecies or whatever, how do you know how many are actually kept in the hobby? Like, how many do
Yeah,
we have floating around?
that's a great question. I believe realistically, if you wanted to get one, there's only a handful of us that have them.
Mhm.
I got mine from Richie. So Richie's the gecko specialist, right?
The Gecko
Um,
King.
yes. So I have Robusta. That's my favorite to keep, just because if you get much smaller than that, like I said, my theme is Pangea and like ease of care. If something's really a huge pain in the butt, so like I've kept Lygodactylus williamsi, the tiny electric blue day geckos. I've bred them. Anything that size or smaller really irritates me, just because the eggs dry out really fast. The babies dry out really, really fast. And if you don't nail the humidity, the only thing I work with that's that small are the Diero geckos and the morning geckos. And so they range in sizes, but you could get this. I think there's like 5 in the hobby. Robustus, the big one, that's what I mainly work with. And then there's Excudia. And Excudia are really cool. They're smaller than Robusta,
Mhm.
but they have more aggressive patterning, like black and white, almost
Okay.
banding. And then I think there's like 2 or 3 others. I couldn't name them off the top
Yeah,
of
the
my
one
head.
with the S. My buddy Wally. Do you know Wally from Supreme Geckos?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I grew up watching his videos.
Really? Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
he
my.
was a big influence on me. Absolutely.
That's
Yeah, I can't
awesome, man. I tell
remember.
him the
Yeah.
same thing. That's my boy. He works with one too. The Sarah, something with an S.
Oh, so yeah, Savage.
Yeah.
Savage is sticker, and he's another
Yep.
explorer.
Yep.
And so yeah, these
Savaji, whatever the. I can't
yeah.
even speak English, let alone
No, you're
Latin.
great. It's really hard to say. It's almost like sausage. It's like Savage, and then it's like 2
Mhm.
eyes. Yeah, it's all Latin, right? And you're
Yes.
naming it after someone else, which just really makes
Yes.
Latin way harder. So there's like 3 right there. I'm pretty positive there's like 1 or 2 more that if you tried really hard or you talked to Richie, like
Mm,
you could definitely get them. And then, like I said, there's at the time 4 or 5 years ago when I got into them, there were 16 described species. I'm sure we don't have all of them in the hobby. That wouldn't
yeah.
surprise me at all. And then like I said, they just named like a year or 2 ago. They
Mhm.
named like 9 more. And that's what happens, right? When you have a very small gecko that's very fast, these things are not very likely to go extinct. There's
Mm,
not a ton of predators that can catch them. Like you could keep them with leeches,
yeah.
and I think a leechie would have a really hard time being fast
Really?
enough to actually catch one, right? And then when you have something that's so small and so fast, obviously it's going to also be hard to describe, right? That's why
Yep.
we're still finding them, and it's very easy for them to speciate because they can take up a very small, like a lychee needs a huge territory, obviously, right? It's gonna be in its own tree hollow, and it's not gonna be able to share. These tiny geckos, I mean, you could probably have 100 of them in like one tree, right? And so, and then it's easier to disperse if it's stuck on a piece of driftwood. A hurricane hits, it's very easy for a gecko like this to
Very
move
true.
to one of the other like 100 tiny islands all over New Caledonia. And then that,
Very
of course,
true.
will lead to more speciation. But yeah, there's probably like 3 or 4 main ones in the hobby. And then if you really looked, you could get like another 1 or
Yeah.
2.
But the Robusta is probably, if someone were just getting into them and getting a pet, would you
Yeah.
say Robusta would be like the best to start with?
I would say yes, right? Because the eggs are going to desiccate way less. And then just in terms of enjoyment, right? You want something that you can actually see. And these guys are
Yeah.
big. It's fun to see. They're not huge, but it's nice to actually have something that's a little bit bigger than a Yuri,
Yeah.
a full-grown female Yuri, in the tank. Yeah, and they're beautiful. I mean, I showed you some of these pictures.
Yeah.
I wanted to get
And
some
we'll
of my
link
own
some too
pictures.
for the people that don't see them right now. I'm going to link some pictures to the recording
Yeah.
so you guys can check them out. Nate's showing some.
I mean,
Yeah,
look, you
they're
can see that's like a
beautiful. They look
full-size
like a
hand. So they're
little.
not like, and even then, that's not full-grown. I've got bigger ones than
Yeah,
that.
they look, I mean, like so many different things. They're a
Yeah.
diplodactyloid. What is it called? Diplodactylus or
Oh, like
diplodactyloid or something?
I call them jelly geckos, but they're like the helmeted geckos. Yeah, it's like Diplodactylus gelatus.
Okay.
Yeah. And those are from Australia, right? Which is not too far away. And they do
Mhm.
look a ton like them. The difference being the gelatus are terrestrial, whereas these guys can
Yeah.
absolutely stick to glass.
I
This is a
genuinely
really,
believe something happened with the Australia New Caledonian geckos.
yeah.
At some point with, we had all the, these continental drifts and moving. I genuinely believe, even when you look at like Strophuris and Eurodactylus, like super the Uris, for example,
Yes.
it's not what's it, divergent evolution? It's not. They're too closely related. There's too many,
Right.
science shows they were related. So at some juncture, New Caledonia was part of Australia.
Yes. I mean, you look at the Nautilus geckos, which are in New Zealand, which is also nearby. And the Nautilus ones are those crazy green geckos. They give live birth. But they also eat Pangea.
Richie just got
them in
some.
Europe.
Richie just got a pair.
Yes, I know. He's killing me. He's like, he teases me sometimes. He'll text me all kinds of crazy nonsense. And he's like, make me an offer. And I'm like, I'm going to get divorced if I buy this. Don't do this. No, he's so funny. But yeah, he has a pair. There's like 3 people in the States. If I ever win the lottery, you'll know. I'll just have a profile picture of one of them. It's a
Right?
dream species by far. Like my wife will ask sometimes, like, what could you get if you could get anything? I'm like, well, if I wanted to be wildly irresponsible, I kind of
Is
have
that
a
what you would
personal rule. I don't have any individual animal in my room that I spent more than $1,000 on. And that's a hard rule. So like if I could
That's
have
good
anything,
for
I'd
a
have,
business. You're making a business. You have to have
Yes.
sellable products, realistic
Yes.
animals, realistic. I respect it, bro. I respect
Yeah.
it. That's an awesome business move.
well, thank you. Also, aren't you based you're in Pennsylvania?
I'm in Connecticut,
Oh,
right
for some
between
reason I
New
thought you were
York
in
and
Pennsylvania. I was gonna
Massachusetts.
congratulate you on the Eagles win last night.
I'm a Dallas fan, dude.
There you go. Well, you're used to heartbreak.
Yeah. Well, let's just say I have been for 40 years. I'm debating for next season.
Yeah, I love that. But yeah, so yeah, they're out there. Richie's always teasing me. And then the other one I would have is those blue tongue skinks that have the crazy knobs to them, like their tail looks like a head.
Shingleback?
The shingleback, thank you. The shingleback
Yeah.
skinks, like that's another one, but they're like $10,000, just like the
They
Nautilus.
are. That's like another, like a lot of people. It's their dream
Yeah.
animal, man. We talked to a lot of guys on the podcast, and a lot of them, will ask, "What would you buy if you could? What would be your dream animal?" Dude, so many people say shingleback.
But they're like seem like extra friendly, extra cuddly, extra adorable. And then it's like most of us already have blue tongue skinks, right? So it's just an expansion of what we already love. But as you said, right, like it is a business. I'm now branded. This is the first time ever I got shirts made.
Congratulations, brother. That's awesome.
But it's funny because
Awesome.
I'm always like a deal. When I buy geckos, I usually try to see like, is there any wiggle room? Because I kind of have like, you do have to kind of have whatever your margin is. And so for me, it's not even about like margin, like could I make more money? It's more just about risk. If I spend more than $1,000 on an animal and it has like what I call a gecko heart attack, just like people, every once in a while, even healthy ones just like drop dead.
They do.
that would be really bad financially for me. And so, yeah, I
Sometimes they
think the
don't
most,
breed, you know.
yeah, I've never spent more than, I don't think more than like 700. And that was for like the Australian leaf tails, which I actually just sold. So it was actually really sweet to get not only what I paid back, but more because now they're adults and like
That's
they've been
awesome.
breeding for a couple seasons. And so, yeah, that's like
That's
a big
awesome.
factor. But back to your original point, right? You look at those gray eye and they look just like a New Caledonian gecko, except they have claws, right? They don't have sticky toe pads because they're more on rocks and stuff instead of like tree bark and leaves. And then yeah, I think a lot of the Australian stuff, it's all it is really similar. Like even the Strophurus,
Mm-hmm.
they look like a New Caledonian gecko once again with some feature changes. Whereas you compare
Absolutely.
that to like the Central American geckos, all look really similar, where they're all very
Mhm.
compressed, they're small, they got really baggy skin, they look different.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And yeah, I definitely think there was some sort of like they were all together and then they weren't,
Mhm.
and then that's how we got what we got.
You ever hear the story or read any information on that extinct something something giganticus, that giant
Yes,
lizard they found, and they didn't know where it
yes.
was from or whatever? They thought it was from New Zealand. They just put a study out and a report after doing some DNA tests that species is from New Caledonia, man.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember
Serious.
seeing
It's
those
it's a
pictures. It's like the ultimate giant gecko,
New
and they have one.
Caledonia.
They have one that's stuffed, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
somewhere in a museum.
Yep.
It's wicked cool, and it doesn't
Yep.
surprise me that these things existed in the same area.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like you said, there's divergent evolution, and there's convergent or convergent evolution, right? And so you have in the Seychelles over like up in North Africa, they have the bronze gecko. It's like Aileronix seychellensis. So you
I'm
have
not
a whole
familiar
bunch
with
of
that
things that are
either.
basically day geckos, but they're not green. They're all brown or golden. And they have one, the Trachygaster. Have you ever seen this? Trachygaster is almost the size of a lychee. And its
No.
temperament is actually very similar. Like you can hold them. They're
Cool.
a little more flighty, and they eat fruit. So you can feed them Pangea, but they're egg gluers. So when they lay eggs, they glue
Like a
them. And they're
tokay or something. Are they in the
kind of
hobby?
oh yeah. Richie has some. I got a buddy who has them. They're extremely expensive. They're 3,500 each. They're extremely rare and they're super protected. Like this is not
I
something.
don't think I've even ever seen one. No
I'll pull up a
shit.
quick picture just for the sake of
Please, that'd be
yeah.
awesome, dude.
Trachygaster gecko. There
I'm
we
all
go.
about cool
This
geckos, man.
called the giant bronze gecko. And so you can see there's a
Wow.
lot of similarities to a lychee, but like I said, they're a little bit
And they
more
look like almost like a rough snout without a rough snout, like a track
yes.
a
Yeah. And
trackies or something.
they eat pollen, so you can see that tree picture just below, and then up there, just the size of them is pretty large. They're like a lychee. They're
No
like really freaking cool.
shit.
So this
That's
is another
freaking
like
cool.
dream species, but once again, I mean, only a handful of people have them. I think one of the big dogs, someone like Kurt Lance or something like that,
Hmm.
might have them. There's like one or two people that have. I mean, it's like the rough-snouted New Caledonian geckos. Like you've got to be very serious and very committed to kind of like the business model of like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm gonna spend like $7,000 to get a pair, and like
I'm
they're gonna
recording on
breed for me.
Thursday with Rock Geckos.
Okay.
Tony, he breeds rough snouts. I think lessers and graders. So
Yeah.
I know nothing about them. Like I know nothing about these bovias. Excuse my pronunciation. That's an awesome freaking
Yeah, it's
gecko, man.
beautiful. I mean, there was a point early in my kind of gecko journey
Wow.
where I probably like I was legitimately thinking like about selling a kidney.
Wow.
just like
Well,
just
that's
give
a
it to me.
goal. You know, with your
But
business, you're not going to sell those like you would move crested geckos or
you're
these
gonna sell
smaller
it
things,
to
but
you're gonna
that's
sell
like
it
a
to the big
little,
dogs,
yeah.
the specialists. Yeah. And then I was trying to find oh great. So I have an answer for you. I was like Googling this. So the Bavia is in honor of Arthur Bavay. So maybe even be Bavayist, who was a French pharmacist and herpetologist. And there's 41 species of Bavia.
What?
Yes, actually, there's a ton. So that kind of goes back to what I was talking about, like the crazy speciation, because you can live in like a tiny tree hollow and then move around
Yeah.
from island to island, and then you're never going to see, you're only going to see the other geckos that are like you, right? And so you can just go
Yeah.
crazy. And they're so small that like I think it's really hard for even birds or anything to pick them off. And so
Yeah.
they, unlike a lot of things that are like sort of endangered in New Caledonia, I think these things thrive. I think they really do well.
Seems like it. With
You know,
It seems like it. They probably live in close proximity to each other too, probably in like little
yeah,
colonies, you know. You
yeah.
could probably so can you keep multiple males together? I mean, I wouldn't just say keep 10 males together, but can you keep a colony of
No,
no,
males are real mean to each other.
really?
I don't know. There's hardly any species of any lizard that I've found that I can get away with males together. I kind of wanted to try it with Yuri's just because it would be like efficient tank wise.
Hmm.
And I might be trying it this year, but I wanted to ask a couple more like experts. I'm like, is this kosher? Is it fine? Because Yuri seem pretty gentle on each other, so I'm like
Yeah.
not super worried if like, okay, if they're fighting, I'm not going to lose one. I can just separate it.
Some species, believe it or not, I was reading and spoke to a few people, like some of the leaf-tail, Madagascar leaf-tail species, like the Sicerae.
Okay.
Richie, for example, keeps colonies of them with multiple males. He
Huh.
said that his breeding went through the roof when he introduced a second male to his harem of females. So I
Huh.
did some research and looking around, and some other people do it as well. That male competition
Right.
actually increases the breeding, and ultimately, I guess, the production. It's an interesting theory. I don't think a lot of people are willing to put their animals on the line like that, but
Yeah.
it's in some species it's known to actually in with these geckos is to increase the breeding.
Yeah, I think we guys another great podcast you guys did was Jack from Gakata Culture, and I think he was saying the same thing for the bamboos that he like puts them
Oh, he
together and he'll see
was,
little
yes.
little nicks, but as long as the animal doesn't look like it's suffering bad,
Yeah. Yep.
then you can separate them if you need to.
Yep.
And I think that's really cool, right? Because we have all of these kind of like it's almost like the Mormon Bible of gecko keeping, where we kind of have like these 16 like almost unspoken rules of like don't put males together. But
Yeah.
as you say, it makes a lot of sense. Like the
Yeah.
competition is sort of like, well, if I don't breed this
It's
female, he's going
natural.
to, and I
It's
don't want him to
natural.
do that. Mm-hmm.
A female, lots of animals, if you watch any documentaries like half like I do, I'm always like all I'll ever watch is like nature documentaries and David Attenborough stuff. And I read a bunch of stuff, and it's that's what they are. The males will put on a display, the female will literally watch, just like birds. The males do their little dance,
Mm-hmm.
the female wants to choose her male, right? Like, and I'm sure that does something physically with stimulating eggs. I had a female, just to go off my rant, but I had a female Chihuahua. She was about 3.5 years old, 4 years old, never even laid a dud, never
Mm.
laid a dud. And I didn't want to introduce a male because I just wanted to wait. I wanted to wait until she was ready, and she produced at
Right.
least a dud or two for me. So I spoke to another buddy of mine, Justin, who breeds them, and told me that he had the same situation. He introduced a male to the female that wasn't laying eggs, and she started producing. Made
Okay.
sure as shit, bro. I did it, and she started producing eggs, man. She
That's so
wasn't producing
wild.
them because there was no reason for her to produce eggs. I put a male in, and
Yeah.
within 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, there was eggs.
That is bizarre. Yeah, and so it is important sometimes. Not I don't want to say like you don't want to challenge too many of these rules because you can learn. I mean, that's the hard part, right? Like as you say, especially if you spent like $700, $1,000 on or $3,000 on a very rare gecko, it's really hard to risk it. And I learned the hard way this year, not to go on too much of a tangent, but I really love Lacertids because they eat Pangea and they can become
Do
really
they?
personable, right? They're like little monitors. And so I got
They
a whole bunch
are.
of wall lizards. I got some of the subspecies like the Clemeri, which is blue, and the Nigrovertis, which is black, the Roman wall
You have
lizard.
some cool stuff, then, man. I didn't
It's
even think,
pretty
because I know
cool.
what they
Yeah.
are, but I'm like, I don't know a lot of people that do, man. And it's that's super cool. Strange story, but those fence lizards, the European fence lizards, somehow a small population established itself right next to me, dude.
Yep.
Like
Yep.
literally right next to me.
Yeah,
My
you can
buddy
find
sent me a
them.
picture, like, what's this? I'm like, where did you take a picture of that? I was like, it looks like a fence lizard. He was like, oh, right down here. I'm like, he was in Greenwich, Connecticut. So I researched it, and sure as shit, I found a bunch of papers and
Mhm.
articles about this
Yep.
population. They're not sure where it came from, but these European fence lizards have established themselves and are breeding, making it through winters. Dude, there's 8 inches of snow on the ground right now.
Yeah. They're so the Italian wall lizards, the main ones, which is like Podacris siculae or something like that, like with an
Mm-hmm.
S, originally came from Italy because they're Italian wall lizards, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they need like need a brumation. If they don't brumate, they do not lay eggs. It's true for most Lacertids,
Yeah.
but they do so well that you can find them in New York City. And there's a guy, I'm not going to name him, but there's a guy who goes to some of like the PA and New York shows and he sells them for like $25. And I'm pretty sure he's just like catching them. He's told me, he's like, I catch them in New York. And then what's really crazy, so like New York's over here, right? But it's like similar latitude as like Italy. And actually, my wife and I were considering at one point going to Italy. It was like a really expensive trip, so we kind of just like gave up. But
Awesome.
Italy's here, New York is over here across the Atlantic, and then you go all the way to Seattle. And if you go north of Seattle, there's part of Canada called Vancouver Island. Huge, huge island, and they are established there too.
No,
so you're talking about a lizard that's from Italy, killing it in Canada, absolutely crushing it. Like, it's well documented that they're there. You can see them on iNaturalist. Same within New York. People have known forever. You know, they probably came over in the 50s or even before that, to be honest. But they thrive in our climate. Like, they need
very similar climates if you think about it. People, you know, I'm Italian. I am Italian.
Yeah.
My grandmother was born there, so it's you know, she'll always say it's just like, you know, it's very similar climates, unless you go south. Like my grandfather is from Palermo and like southern Italy, which is much warmer on the Mediterranean over there. But above where my grandmother is from, Naples and I don't even freaking know, but somewhere up north is just like our climate, so it makes sense. You know, it makes perfect sense that they're thriving. You know,
yeah, and it is interesting because the Mediterranean doesn't have as much seasonal, like depending on where you're like in Italy, right? If you're in the mountains, you're definitely going to experience a lot of cold, a lot of hot, and Italy gets like really freaking warm and humid, like North Carolina. But then even in the Mediterranean, but then those kind of become subspecies where they don't do as well in New York. They're used to heat year round. It's super cool. But I learned the hard way that like you can't do a trio of wall lizards. You can't have multiple males. So I've actually lost a few. It was a sad and sometimes very cheap and sometimes very expensive lesson. Like some of the rare subspecies, like the Clemeri and the Nigrovirtus, are like they're like 150 to $200 captive bred, and you can only get them captive bred. And so like losing those sucked, and they just don't play very well with each other. And then I actually was doing some research. I was like, why do these things keep dying? And it's like I have like a trio or like a group of 4. And even a trio, they'll kill one of the females. They'll gang up on a female. You got to keep them in a pair or nothing, almost. Really? Or like maybe you could keep like a lone female or like a lone male. But if you want to breed,
good information. That's good to know.
Yeah,
that's good to know.
And so
it's awesome that you're honest like this too, Nate. That you're admitting you've had flaws and have lost things. Because a lot of people like to put on a front like they don't lose animals and shit doesn't happen.
Right.
If you keep a significant amount of animals like we do, shit happens, man.
Yeah.
I just lost a leaf tail the other day, man, and that thing killed me. I mean, it was a $350 animal. Effed me up in the head, bro. Like I was really contemplating whether I wanted to keep all these Madagascan species. I'm like, you know, I'm not gonna just keep killing animals here, man. Like we can't do this. But I got my shit together, regrouped, found out what the problem was. You make adjustments. And you continue learning, you know, you continue learning, you continue keeping, you continue improving the species in the hobby. And you admitting that you have had incidences is super noble of you to be that honest. You know, that's very, very cool.
I really appreciate you saying that. And I'm always really honest about it, right? Because when you work with as many species as I do, when you're working with anoles, lacertids, a ton of different species of gecko, plus skinks, plus turtles, like you are gonna, and some of the stuff I bring in is wild caught, and like it goes in a separate room. But you absolutely are gonna lose things to, you know, they come in with like a parasite load or whatever. And there's also trial and error, right? This is my first year really keeping a wide variety of lacertids, and a lot of them are very easy, like a keel-bellied lizard or, you know, whatever. But a lot of them are not super easy. And so that's where I'm always honest with people. I think it'd be crazy if you talk to someone and they're like, oh no, I never lose anything. Like I'll tell you, I never lose crested geckos because they're easiest. I mean, they're
I haven't ever. I've lost tails on them, unfortunately. And after 7 years, dude, in 7 years, I had one lose his tail the first week. I had an incident where he ran around my laundry room because I just got him, so I was keeping my little quarantine thing over there. I was taking him out, doing a little check. He hopped out of my hand, ran behind the cabinet, ran behind the washer and dryer. I'm like, what do I do? So I put a stick behind there to try to get him on the stick and pull the stick out. I get him out. I have him in my hand. Drops his tail after the whole spiel of running around and doing all this. He drops his tail in my hand, just sitting there. So 5 more years go by. I don't lose a single tail.
Yeah.
Maybe a month ago, 2 months ago, about a month ago, I started putting some pairs together. I lost about 4 more tails on all lilies. I'm running all lily white pairs this year, man. A couple pairs of super dowels, but all my freaking four lilies, man, all lost their tail. I can't. I'm like dumbfounded. It drives me nuts. I think that super white tail on a lily like really
that
adds to the lizard, man. And I don't do the whole it's just a breeder thing. These are my animals,
Right.
my pets, my collection, my you know what I'm saying, right? They're mine. I love these little things.
And it's an aesthetic thing, right? Just if you like the tail, you like the tail. Like I prefer all my geckos to have tails. Yeah, I lost. This kind of made me like we talked about like different headspaces, right? And we've had people talk about that on the podcast. But like the Lycodactylus williamsi, so I'm breeding them. I got a male and a female. They're beautiful. And then like one day, it was like the male was down. He was just dead, and I don't know why. I was feeding him, so I replaced him. And then the problem with these things is like everyone knows day geckos are fast.
Mm-hmm.
But the Ligos are like another. They're like it's like the Indy 500 of they're just like and so I've had a couple get out over the like 3 or 4 years that I've been keeping them, and one got out a few weeks ago, and man, I was raging. I was like, you know what, I am done. I don't want to be stressed every time. Like once again, like my theme is eats Pangea and or is really enjoyable to keep. It's either very easy or I can have a relationship with them or whatever it is. And so I was like, I don't want to be stressed out. I was stressed. I could feel it in my heart. Every time I was opening the container, like the 12 by 12 by 18, I was stressed out. And then this thing jumps out and I tried to grab it and its tail came off. And then you're going to love this story though, because it has a happy ending. That was January 6th or 7th or something like that. And then a few days go by, and I'm kind of keeping an eye out for it, but I'm not putting in like crazy effort because a lot of things tend to show up on their own if you just like chill. I started seeing him on top of a UVB bar that was over like my Strophaurus and some of my frogs. And so I saw him there, and like the first day he just totally got away. And then the second day he was up in a groove in part of the rack. And so I'd put my finger up on the other side and I'd scoot him out and he'd jump. And I would try to have a cup or like pin him to the floor and then just like, and then throw him in a tank. And this happened 2 or 3, 4 or 5 days. And he would always get away. Like he'd land on the wall and then bam, right behind the rack. And it's just the way that my room is set up. You cannot just like, it's not an easy thing.
Imagine. Trust me.
And then I tried to get him in a cup and he kept getting away. And I was like, and then I didn't see him for a whole week. And I was like, dang, now we're getting to the point where usually lizards die because most geckos can live in your room for about 2 weeks. But that's about when the desiccation catches up with them. Depending on how your room is set up, they're probably not finding enough bugs to like live for too long. And they're not like a leopard gecko where they store a lot of fat. So like, and then water, the hydration is the big one, right? So we get to 3 full weeks. I'm talking like January 27th.
He was living.
I hopped in my gecko closet that I have a whole bunch of supplies in. And so, there was a cricket cup, like it had cricket dust, like the white powder that you calcium dust them. And it was in the closet and I hear all this rattling and there's a tailless male LIGO rattling around. And so what had happened is somehow he jumped in the cup, but because there was dust, his feet weren't sticky anymore. And so it was sort of like a pitfall trap that he had fallen into. And I was thrilled because the way that it was set up, I was really surprised he got into it. It was off the wall. He must have jumped off a wall and just random chance he fell in there, and thank God I found him or he would have like dried up and died. Threw him in his own little tank. We're nursing him back to health. His tail is coming back. He looked a little thin. He's fat now. He's eating Pangea. He's living the life. And so I'm still stressed because I don't know how I'm going to get him out of this tank that I put him in, and that's going to be a nightmare. But yeah, I'm always really honest with people. Stuff happens, and it's just like I've had customers buy stuff and then it crashed. But I'm happy to say that most of the time, I mean, not happy to say, but I'm like,
they're the lessons, right? I usually hate to sound like this or be negative or pessimistic, but without things going wrong, we never get the chance to figure out how to fix them, right? Like you almost need things to go wrong in order to learn. You can't, and then once you learn, you can prevent things from
Hmm.
happening, you know, once you've
Yeah.
been through it, I guess. I mean, it sucks. And that's what communication, these podcasts are great for too, you know, because if
Oh
someone's
yeah.
going through a situation that you've been through, they can learn from you, you know. Let's say, okay, well, this is very similar to what happened with Nate. This is what's going on. He did this. I'm going to do this. And it's, you know, we need to share that information in this community. You know, I find a lot of people are not so willing to share, you know, and
Yeah.
it's sucks
Yeah.
because everyone's little experiences, I mean, they're all lessons that if you put them together, you'd have a book bigger than anyone could write, right? You'd have more pages than you could fit in any bound book if everyone put the lessons they've learned together in this reptile hobby. It's it is
Well,
what it is, man.
I'm super thrilled. I mean, this sounds like I'm just like feeding your guys' ego, but I've been loving the podcast. Just I love it, right? Like, and
Appreciate
the
that.
fact that it's also like you have to think about like it's permanent media, right? So like when
Mhm.
I started this, like I've only been breeding geckos for like 8 years, which I say only because there's people like Alan Rapashi,
Yeah.
Richie, people have been doing this for like a decade, more than a decade, right? And so when I started out, especially when I got into the rare stuff, like rare
Mm.
species, there was like nothing on them. You know what I mean? Like I couldn't find anything, or like I think there was a website called Geckos Unlimited
There
that
is still,
used to,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I
tons of great
still,
information, but some of those
yeah.
threads are like super dead, or like the links don't
Mhm.
work. And so what's really cool about especially with what you guys have been doing with the podcast, is that you have like mostly geckos, which is great because like that's what I specialize in. It's not Nate Skinks, it's Nature Nate geckos. But you have these like experts, these subject matter experts. So
Yeah.
like Sarah's, you just did an episode, or like Leeches, you have like Boris on there. The monkey tail anoles. There was only like 3 care guides, and I think maybe he wrote one of them, and
He
that's what got
did.
me
Yeah,
into
he
them.
did. Yeah.
It's just a wealth of knowledge. It's helpful for zoos. A friend of mine, Chris Norman, is one of the only, if not the only, people in the United States that breeds croc tegus. And like zoos are learning from him, right? And so, kind of like what you were saying, where like a
That's
lot of people, it
badass.
seems, sorry, I'm just like shifting my foot's asleep. A lot of people, especially in the herping hobby, like if you want to go find snakes or lizards or geckos in the wild, a lot of herp people are super, super gatekeepy about spots. They won't give you any spots. And you're like, look, man, and I get it. To some extent, it kind of makes sense, right? Because like some of them are protected and they don't want you. Like, I mean, I've been out with people and they're like, oh, yeah, I'm hoping to catch one and like keep it as a pet. I'm like, oh, well, like, yeah, I'm not going to show you my spot because I don't
That would,
want you
yeah, that would
pretty
make
much doing that. And like, if you want to buy a captive bred, whatever, it's out there. You can go buy it. I don't really want you doing this. But it also sucks because if you're brand new and then no one tells you anything, it's like, okay, but I'm just like, for me personally, when I go out, I'm not collecting. I'm a nature photographer. It just is
yeah.
really fun for me. Like we're gonna do a trip to the Keys in a couple months,
Really? Well,
and
you'll
so we're
have
gonna
fun
go
with
down.
that, brother. You'll have some
I
fun.
can't wait to see. They now have morning geckos in the Keys. So if actually, I thought it would be really funny if I did collect them. I'm not gonna do this, but if you did collect them and sell them as like wild type morning geckos to like increase the productivity of your bloodline, would be like super fun. Like, there's 4 types of morning geckos. You would have like a 5th type, and it would be like the Floridian line. It's just really funny to me. You know what I mean? Because they're in
It
Hawaii,
is.
they're in Japan, they're in the
Mhm.
Philippines, and then I don't know where else they are. But I just think that's
I
crazy.
found yeah, New Caledonia. I was on iNaturalist and I'm looking at all the little pictures that people take at some and it's not a bavia or however you pronounce it. Just excuse
Yeah,
my pronunciation,
or you're
but
good.
there was someone took a picture and it's still on iNaturalist, a picture of a morning gecko in the lodge in New Caledonia.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so I was reading up about them, and apparently they are like they have been documented in New Caledonia, all over Indonesia.
Yeah.
They've made it everywhere, and they're saying it's likely due to cargo transport or something, but
Okay.
it
Because it would
makes
surprise
sense.
me, right? You have a gecko that eats fruit that looks like a bavia. And then once again, they're small, they're easy to transport, they're easy to evade detection by predators.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go off on too much of a tangent, but the Florida biology is really interesting because you have day geckos in like the middle of the Keys, and you can find them in Tampa and you can find them in Miami too.
Hmm.
Um, but they're really, really like prominent there because day geckos get respiratory issues if they get too cold. So
Really?
more than other geckos, they can be a little sensitive to temperature. I know at
Okay.
least the Clemeri, I've seen issues if they get too cold.
Yeah.
I think it's respiratory, but yeah, the only time I've ever lost a Clemeri was when my whole house didn't have heat. Everything else was fine. Clemeri, freaking like, I lost one or two. But anyway, and then there's tokays, and then there's reef geckos. And what's really interesting is the reef geckos, they're like native to the Keys.
That's what
But
I was
late,
reading. Yeah.
but lately they're saying that a lot of those actually were
They're
probably
invasive.
introduced. And we
Mhm.
even have geckos here. I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina. We have geckos here, and I'm part of some of the wildlife groups. I'm part of some of the reptile rehoming and like reptile appreciation groups. And pretty much weekly, there's a post of, "Hey, I found this gecko outside. What is it?" And it's a
Right.
Mediterranean gecko. It's one of those like gray, the typica, or whatever they are. They look like crap. They're really not like a gecko you would want to keep, but it's called a Mediterranean gecko. And what they often do is they're coming in on plants. And then because North Carolina, I'm not going to say it's temperate. People say that, and I think that's crazy. But at the coast, it is temperate. And then in Charlotte and Raleigh, where it freezes pretty hard here, most of them are surviving by being in greenhouses. And so you will see people post pictures of a gecko that looks a lot
Yeah,
rougher
I'm
than
like
this.
same thing. I'm on the same page.
Yeah,
Bro.
yeah, yeah. Shout out to
That's
Google.
funny.
But there are established geckos, and like scientists know it. They've known for like 20 years, and so they consider them to be introduced but not invasive because they're not actively destroying, at least according to the scientists that are keeping an eye on this. They're not actively destroying or displacing current lizard populations, but they do breed here, which is really interesting. North Carolina has a gecko. You know what I mean? And then it's like Florida, you can find, I think it's almost 12 or 15 species of gecko now are in Florida, mostly in the Keys, the Everglades, and like the southern half.
Chameleons too. They've got quite.
Yeah,
I've seen them finding panthers now, bro. Panthers
that's
are
nuts. Yeah,
in a way, dude. I'm like,
kind of
it's a
stoked.
super ambiguous thing for me, right?
Yeah,
Like I love nature, and I agree with conservation of all sorts. Like I think that that's our duty, to preserve nature. Like
yeah,
I'm such an advocate on letting things live, I guess, and just being. And that's where I have this conflict because I'm like, it's our fault that they're there. I don't care whether it
yeah,
was a plane or whatever the hell they got there. We made the technology that got them there. If it was the pet trade,
right.
whatever it was, we did it. They don't necessarily, in my heart tells me that they don't deserve to pay the consequences, right? Like if they're
Absolutely.
living
Yeah,
and they're
yeah,
thriving, why do you have to be out there killing these fucking things, man? Like these guys go, I mean, figure something else out, man. Like you're just out here just killing things for fun. They got like it's open season on
yeah,
iguanas. Guys
yeah,
are making fun and laughing jokes and shooting these
yeah,
things out of trees with arrows and stuff. Like, dude, man, like I'm like so conflicted because
yeah,
again,
yeah,
I understand the natural biology, and Florida is such a unique place that we do have to protect the native natural side of it. But what are iguanas really doing? What are chameleons doing? You guys got the biggest mosquito problem in the world. Like, how many times have presidents and all types of politicians tried to, fill the Everglades and get rid? I
sure.
mean, like, come on, man. Like, you're like,
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
you'll always have a buddy in me in that kind of thinking, right? I think it's the natural duality and complexity of the issue, right? Because yes, we did introduce them, but it's like as you say, right? It's like if you love reptiles, of course it's going to break your heart when something that's huge and charismatic, like an iguana, and then yeah, you people like drowning them, breaking their
yeah,
necks, and you're like, oh,
it's
this is. I mean,
fucking.
same with like feral cats, and then yeah, there's not a lot of legislation that makes a lot of sense. Like I live in North Carolina, right? And so here, the eastern box turtle is technically,
Love them.
so people think they're endangered. I don't even want to say this because it like, you know what I mean? But they're technically not endangered, but by law you can't just go like take a ton of them.
Mm,
There actually is I'm not going to even say the number, but there is a number that you are allowed to collect with a permit
really?
for free. You cannot sell them and you cannot move them across state
Mhm.
lines. But I don't even want to say that because then people are going to go
Yeah,
do it.
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
But
Well,
even then,
when I was a kid, I did. I hate to say it, but I was
oh,
up
it's
in
fine. Yeah.
Massachusetts, in Chatham,
Right.
Massachusetts, and we found one crossing the road. My dad pulled the Jeep over, picked it up. I got 3 younger brothers. He's like, here's your new pet. We had that thing for 16, 17 years. You know, his name was
Yeah,
Chatham. We named him after the place we found him. And the older I get, the more, terrible I feel about doing it. But I mean, it's
sure.
all water under the bridge now. But that's interesting. I also was reading too that they live their whole lives in like 1 mile, like a mile
Yeah.
box turtle.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah, yeah. There was a guy here in North Carolina that did a study. He had like a certain number of acres in a stream,
Hmm.
and he would find and you because all box turtles have their shells are sort of like a tiger or like a fingerprint.
Uh-huh.
They're very specific to that turtle. And so he would mark the same turtles in like pretty much the same like hectare
Yeah.
spot like year after year. And he's been doing this and photographing them for like I don't know, like 10 years. So he has a lot of data.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean it's rough for me. So like I always follow the rules, right? But then it's like, okay, you can't collect, more than 5 natives. And I'm like, okay, that's the rule. And that's fine until you look across the street and they're clear cutting 100 acres of forest for a new development. And you're like, okay, cool, but you're definitely killing hundreds of turtles, snakes,
Oh
anoles,
yeah.
grasshoppers, moths,
Salamanders, all
stuff.
tree
Yeah,
frogs.
birds that are going to depend on. Yeah, so then that's where the disconnect. And I think a lot of people now are really upset because the Everglades are under attack, not only by invasive species, but also by people just like clear cutting new developments. There's no place for the
Exactly.
gators to go. So yeah,
Super,
there's a
super
natural, and you
freaking
can be
valid
both,
point.
right? You can enforce the rules and also say, hey, the
Mhm.
government's also just like totally dropping the ball on this like native salamander population
Mhm.
or overdevelopment. And the
Mhm.
same thing with the invasives, right? So I watched this guy. Once again, I try not to like name people. I'll only name people if they want to be named. But there's a great
Yeah.
guy on Instagram that he captures invasives in Florida and then he sells them to the pet trade. And there's a lot of guys who do this. It's not just him.
Yeah.
And I enjoy his content. I find it wild. Like he's catching, giant chameleons and
Mhm.
night anoles and all kinds of stuff. And I understand he's trying to put food on his, this
Yeah.
plate for his family, and it's a job. But
Mhm.
man, the comments are so negative, and there's a lot of
They
people who are
are.
like,
I know
"You should."
exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah,
I
it rhymes
And
with
again, I'm
BNA.
hard pressed because I get it. I get
Yeah,
it. At least he's not killing them, right? In theory, he's taking them from a stressful natural life where they could be
right,
prey,
right,
they could be whatever, and he's technically putting them in homes where people are going to pamper them. I mean,
right.
but
They-
hey, it's better than him killing them. That's all I can say. It's
well,
better
all the
than him out
comments
there
are,
just killing them for a bounty and
yeah, all the comments are screaming, "Kill it." It's brutal. Like they were criticizing him for selling them. They're saying that you
kill
should be
them, kill
killing
the
the.
animals.
It's actually pretty wild. Yeah, on Instagram, I'll go through his comments, and most people are screaming like, "Kill him!" This is invasive, and it's like, yes, but it's also an animal, right? It's like feral cats.
Are we
Feral
not
cat,
invasive? Are we
huh?
not invasive?
I mean, depending on who you ask, I'm sure we are. But it's like feral cats. Or I think that's my soapbox. That it's my one opinion that would probably get me in so much trouble. But like feral cats are known to kill 1 billion with a B birds a year in the United States alone.
Yeah.
So like you think about it on a very practical level, should we kill feral cats? Abso-freaking-lutely, because feral cats, outdoor cats, die twice as fast as indoor cats because they get sick, they get diseases, they get hit by cars, they get eaten by coyotes. And so it's like, okay, if you tell this to a cat owner, they will hate you because like, no,
Yeah.
it's cruel to keep it inside. It's like, yes, but it's cruel to let it out. It'll literally live 8 years instead of 16. Like literally, they have proven that.
My cat's never been outside. She's like 3 years old. She's never
Yeah,
left the house. She sits in the
yeah,
window and looks at birds, but
yeah.
we
And she'll
don't we
live
don't
way
let her out.
longer. But then
Uh,
morally, right? Could you kill a cat? That's pretty rough. I mean, it's a fuzzy, cute. I
yeah.
love animals. So then, morally, right? Like, okay, if we were going to do that, and Australia does that, Australia kills feral cats. It's
Well, they're doing
crazy.
some. They do damage, bro. They're
They do.
predators, man. They are straight
Yeah,
predators. They wreak havoc, like much more, I would say, than the iguanas or the snakes or the anything. I mean, a
right.
snake is not. I mean, you're familiar with snakes, dude. They don't gorge themselves. They're not eating all day, every day. They'll knock a bird off or something, and they're good for 2 weeks, man. These cats. I have read studies the cats are like one of, if not the only animal, I believe, that kill for fun. Cats
Yeah.
will kill for
Yeah.
fun. Now, every other
Yeah.
animal on the planet kills for food, but other than humans, cats are the only thing that kill for entertainment.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. They get a huge pass. If you talk to a cat owner, they all have a story of like, oh yeah, it like killed a baby bunny, it killed a lizard, and like put it at my, like they all have these stories.
Mm,
And I'm not saying we should kill cats. I couldn't do it personally. That's
yeah,
brutal. What
yeah,
I am saying is we should make outdoor cats illegal. If
yeah.
you're going to go after the invasives or you're going to go after the pet trade in Florida and you're going to say you can't have exotic animals, you absolutely should like have to have a permit for a cat. It should
Mm.
have to stay indoors. Like I'm just saying when you're talking about like equivalency, right? And it's
Yeah,
kind of like the same thing you're
absolutely.
saying of like, and then part of me is actually kind of stoked. So like when I go to Florida, half the fun is seeing curly-tailed lizards. It's seeing anoles, like crested anoles, night anoles. You're seeing those
Yeah,
Spider-Man agamas. I mean, these are things that are clearly introduced. Butterfly
yeah.
agamas. I don't love that they're there from like a ecological perspective, but as a reptile enthusiast who's probably never going to have enough money to go to Africa,
Mhm.
seeing a Spider-Man agama running across a Walmart parking
Cool
lot,
as hell, right?
kind of dope. It's
It
really
does.
dope.
It's like a
And
like
then,
a sci-fi movie or something.
yeah,
Like you're in a different place. It's like I
yeah,
don't know how to explain it. I because I've seen them. I've been there, and it's like you're
right.
if you're into animals, you'll get a feeling that's just super unique. You know,
Yes,
like you're
yeah,
where they're from, but you're not. They're where you are. It's like
yeah,
a
yeah.
this. It's a blast, man, and that's what I'm saying. I would hate to see that go. I mean, it's not for
Hmm.
nothing. If you took humans out of the mix, maybe these animals wouldn't necessarily be here in the abundance that they are. But even like you said before, with storms and
Right.
those big things that form on the ocean, trees and debris, and they transport, they move around from. Who's to say that over time these animals wouldn't have gotten there, right?
Oh,
And if
absolutely.
they're living, so be it. This is now
Right.
their natural environment. They're not going to make it up to the Carolinas. They're not making it up to Mass. Nope.
Right.
Climate is
Right.
going to keep them in an isolated area. Nature is doing what it needs to do. You don't need to be out there killing them. Nature will handle it. They can't
Right.
just go anywhere they want to.
Well, for a long
It's
time, certain tropical beetles were technically illegal in the United States. A lot of people had them. I'm talking about things like Goliath beetles, flower beetles,
like
and
rhinoceros beetles,
yes, and certain
dung
stag
beetles, and stuff.
beetles. Yeah, and so it's kind of funny that it was like they were so aggressive about, and people had them anyway. I don't know,
I
but
know
then you
quite a
it's
few people that do.
yeah, but you would think about like okay, from like a logical perspective, the larvae eat decaying wood, so there's really no threat to like the
Mhm,
environment. And then of course they're from Africa, right? So if they're
mhm,
living anywhere other than like San Diego, parts of
mhm.
Texas, and parts of Florida, they will die in the winter. And like they also take a year or two to reproduce.
So
They're never going to become like a roach where you have like a million of them, right? Like we're not going to have giant, Goliath beetles taking over Texas. As dope as that would be, and that's my dream, but it will never happen, right? So then once again, so what's really interesting is to the reef gecko I was telling you about.
mhm.
They're almost positive, and this recently came out. They're almost positive now that the Keys reef geckos and other these are the Spherodactylus. So there's kind of like wonky, like the very round eye. They're very
Yep,
small. I
yep,
wouldn't keep them because they're too small. They're almost positive that those actually were probably introduced from the Bahamas or from
mhm.
Cuba or
I
from
read
wherever
this. Yes.
naturally. But what's really interesting is like, okay, so you have an introduced species, right? It's not native, but some of them are protected by Florida state law as a
Mhm.
protected species because there's not very many of them. And
Yeah,
so it's kind of funny because it's not an invasive species because it's a very tiny gecko. What's it going to
yeah,
do? It's not going to destroy anything. And maybe it
yeah.
doesn't compete with anything else that's endangered, but they're actually protected. Like if you went down to the Keys and you tried to collect them and sell them, the government would get mad at you or whatever. And that's one that's really interesting because now you're protecting an animal that is not
Yeah,
native,
yeah,
right? And then that just it's a crazy sentence, and
yeah,
that's the reality that people in Florida
yeah.
are seeing, right? And
Well,
then
I mean, I respect it in all honesty because that is something that had no real, well, potentially had no real human
right,
influence, right? If there was some type
right,
of debris that they came right over for, I mean, that's a super that's nature. That would have happened
yeah,
without us or with us.
right.
So how do you determine it's not native when it is? I mean, it's kind of like us, like all of our ancestors come from different continents and whatnot. We all came here. this is our home now, right? This is our
Right.
homeland. You are an American. So if these things came over, they reproduce, they got babies, they're native. I
Right.
mean, it sounds ridiculously stupid and simple minded, but fuck, they are.
If I could have a, if I could, I think a lot about like if I could do everything over again, if I could have a second career, I probably would actually really like to do like wildlife, maybe not like enforcement, but sort of like wildlife legislation of just like, I think a lot
Yeah.
of times they just need someone in the room that like does the hobby. So like
It
that,
knows what they're talking about.
yeah, because that guy
Absolutely.
got bit in South Carolina, and now South Carolina is at risk of losing venomous, which is crazy because forever South Carolina was like the Wild West of like you can keep anything here, like kangaroos go crazy, Gila monsters, venomous snakes. And so once again, it's like it would be kind of nice to have more representatives in the room that because the average person in Congress does not keep reptiles, right? And so one of us could go out there and be like, look, this guy doesn't represent us. These things are going to happen. He had a video of him doing crazy stuff. We
Is
don't
it the
endorse this.
taipan thing? The taipan?
Yeah, the inland taipan. I'm trying not to say his name, but you know what I'm saying, right? So like
Yeah.
to have a representative, and I think that's the other thing that I don't like about this hobby is that everything seems so like people want everything to be binary, black and white, and it's okay to have a nuance. You can not like that there's pythons in the Everglades, and at the
Mm.
same time feel bad for them when they're killed because it's a big beautiful snake. If you didn't feel bad, you probably wouldn't like reptiles. You know what I mean? Like if someone killed a ball python in front of me, I'd be very upset. And it's
Yeah.
the same thing. It's like, should it be living in Chicago on the street? Probably not. But you killing it makes me bummed. So that's why I like these guys in Florida that are selling them, and they only sell them in the pet trade to states that are northern, like New
Yeah.
York. Like a chameleon is not going to survive a New York winter for sure. It's not
It's
going to get enough
awesome. It's
hydration.
responsible. I
Right.
I
Yeah.
respect it. Again, like I said, I
Yeah.
absolutely respect it. You know, it's
Right.
they're not killing them. They're not killing them. And being that they are invasive,
Right.
listen, if you can feed your children by collecting some of those things and putting them into the hobby, and again, that's kind of cool because we get the chance to, I don't know how you would really classify that as far as new, but it is still new blood into it. You know, you're diversifying bloodlines in the hobby with certain animals. People working with the night owls, the chameleons, the
Right.
agamas. You know, there's, I mean, it is. Wouldn't it be? Would it be wild? Do you consider it wild if it's invasive? Is it still wild,
Well, it's
Paul?
funny. It's funny too because like a lot of Florida keepers are keeping so many things that are from Cuba or from Central America outside, right? So we're talking about like redfoot tortoises and night anoles and all of the crown giant anoles, and a lot of people keep them outside. And so you think about it, it's like, okay, well, if you're even me here in North Carolina, I'm working on some outdoor enclosures for like I
Are
have a
you
redfoot tortoise and I have a banana pectinata and some night anoles.
pectinatas? They're going up and coming
Freaking
species, brother.
we could talk about that. But I outdoors, it's hot and it's humid here. It's the perfect climate, and I can get away with it from like April to like October, like almost all of the year, like 2/3 of the year. It's hot and humid as all get out.
Mm,
It's raining, so I really
yeah.
want to do it. But immediately I'm thinking like, okay, now this is not just a captive bred animal. It
Mhm.
is being exposed. Like there's anoles that live here, right? So it's like, okay, you are exposing it to potentially parasites, to whatever. It may still be captive bred in the sense that you bred it in a box, right? Like
Yeah.
the people in Florida that do it year round. But it is something to think about when you're bringing something into your collection. It's like, okay, it's captive bred, but it was exposed. Like,
Mhm.
does it have parasites? Absolutely. It's something. Probably. It may not, but it might. And so that's
I
something
think
to
to
think
a
about.
degree, a lot of these things do. I mean, that's a topic.
Yes.
That's, we can go on for hours about that. But I mean, I'm big into human fitness and nutrition
Mm,
and stuff, and I believe that parasites to a degree and all of these animals are very natural. You know, they
sure.
it's bacterias. But they have systems and their immune systems combat certain things, and it's I mean, animals have died. I know of people that have killed animals by like deworming them, giving them
Yes.
panicure and
Yes.
stuff. They've killed the animal by I'm figuring killing off too much good bacterias and
Yes.
whatever else is going on in their body that's killing these parasites. But
No, absolutely. Well, I people are starting to come around to this now in podcasts and other things. I heard someone say it on one of your podcasts, right? But a lot of people will bring in wild caught stuff and immediately panicure. It's like, no, 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 immediately hydration. get it
Yes,
stable, get it
yes,
eating, and then after a
yes,
couple months,
yes.
once you know that it's stable,
A healthy
then
animal
it
will
can
fight it, man.
handle some
Yes.
level of a panicure, some level of, whatever antibiotic you're using. Even people, I have a good buddy of mine, um, and he's really gone through the ringer because of antibiotics. If you overuse them or they're overprescribed, it can kill your natural gut flora. And then
Oh,
you have bad bacteria come in and colonize. And like, even my friends who like haven't really had like the worst time, the week that they were on antibiotics, their digestive system was all like messed up, right? And so there is a cost trade-off. And so once again,
absolutely.
if you have an animal that's like not putting on weight, okay, yeah, it's probably a good candidate to use some dewormer. But once
Yeah.
again, after it's been established, this thing has been on a plane
Hydrated.
or in a box for like months. Don't just give it a high dose of honestly painful chemicals, right?
Mhm.
And it's cool to see people are coming around to that. I do want to
Absolutely.
go back really quick. I was correct. I looked this up. The first Bavia species was described in 1872, and it was Bavia cyclura, which is the other one that people have. That's like the fourth
Okay.
one. They stay smaller.
Okay.
And then like literally like 30 of them were described in 2022. So just a couple of years
Oh
ago.
shit.
And
That's
then
amazing. So are
there's
you keeping
two
just the one species?
what?
Do you have one the
I
Bavias? Are you
currently only keep one. I didn't want to
okay?
collect them all, even though that's usually kind of my MO.
I
Just
was
because
just that's what I was gonna ask. Do you have any intentions on getting all that you can, all in the hobby, or
I could have like 5 of them. I think for me, once again, it's kind of like the LIGO story that I told you, where like they can
Hmm,
be very fast. And so with the big ones, it's not so much of a big deal because you can only
yeah,
be so fast when you're that big.
yeah.
But the smaller ones, I didn't want to keep. I
Pain
didn't
in
want
the
to have
butt.
tons of tanks of things that are like morning geckos, where I get a little frustrated if one like darts out and it's hard to catch and like
Are they all flighty? I mean, maybe some species are like the Uris. My Yuri doesn't. She doesn't try to go anywhere, But
that's because their tails are too long. It holds them back.
yeah,
They
I
slide.
imagine so.
They're all pretty dang quick. It's like any
Yeah,
small skink
very
species. They are
morning
lightning.
gecko-ish, very
It's
morning gecko-ish, day gecko-ish.
it's a survival strategy,
Yeah,
right? It's like you literally
yeah,
cannot catch me. Whereas like a bigger
yeah.
animal could hold its ground sometimes,
Hmm.
and so they can be bigger, right? Like you notice like the
Hmm.
Equestrius podior, the blue beauty anoles, they're mean as
Hmm.
hell. They puff up, they get the
Yeah,
dewlap, and they will actively try to bite me. But once
yeah,
again, you're talking about a lizard that's like 12 inches long, right? It has some
yeah.
size to it. So like if a bird wanted to, mess with it, or like a praying mantis, right, is like one of the biggest bugs. So it's
Hmm.
reaching a level where it can actually kind of start to be like, actually, I'm going to evaluate you and see if I can take you on and
Yeah,
intimidate you off.
yeah.
And I wanted to mention something else too. There's two other geni. One's called panny gecko. Nobody has ever heard of that. Panny gecko, I'm not even sure anyone keeps it. It's PANIEGEKKO. So kind of like Pangea, like panny. And so that used to be a Bavia species. And I think they moved into its own. You honestly cannot even find like pictures of these things on Google. And then the other one is
Really?
Diero gecko, which I mentioned. And so Diero gecko look a lot like the Bavia, and they're very closely related, but they tend to not have the banding pattern, sort of like a Chihuahua. They have it's almost like stripes, and they're kind of a bronze color. And I'll show you
Are they
a
from New
picture.
Caledonia?
Yep, yep. It's actually really funny when you Google it. You get a picture of a Yuri. That is
Oh,
absolutely a Yuri,
that's
not
not it. I was gonna say that's
not
not
a
it
deer
though.
gecko. This is a deer gecko, and I breed these too. I have deer gecko nuhoensis, and so they kind of
That's
have like
it.
a stripe.
Yeah.
It's really cool to see them on the flowers because they also eat Pangea. They're also sexual in nature, as opposed
How
to
many of those do you
asexual.
have? You have a little same thing, just a pair, or can
Just
you only
a
keep them?
pair. As far as I know, there's only like two or three of us that really keep these, and then
The only
the
one I know.
babies. The babies are friggin' morning gecko sized, and they stress me out.
Wow.
And so that's the big thing, right? When you talk about breeding Robusta, morning geckos, Diero gecko, anything that's really small,
Do those
right?
Dieros, do they bury their eggs?
Yes, they do. And so this is a Diero. Full size is the same size as a morning gecko. They're not bigger than a morning gecko. They do seem, these ones, at least in my experience, tend to be under stuff. So
Okay.
actually, they seem very low in the tank. So I have a lot of like cork cover and little tubes on the ground. But they also bury, and then the incubation is actually the same as like a new cow, which is
I'd
great. Room
imagine.
temp. But when
I'd
you are
imagine.
raising the babies, I buy these very small glass. They're actually, I think they're like a half gallon. That you can buy them on Chewy. Not a sponsor, but you can buy them on Chewy.com. They're like half glass and they're screen tops. And so what I've been doing for a lot of my tiny geckos that are very prone to drying out or whatever is I set them up as like a very small bioactive. So you have like cocoa fiber, Reptisoil, whatever you want, and then
Uh-huh.
cocoa chips. And so what that does is you have like a gradient where like
Yeah.
the bottom
Yeah.
can be moist and wet, but then the chips are always going to dry out because they're on top. And then you have a couple
Uh-huh.
branches, and then I put the Pangea in there, and then I use egg tubes. And so this is actually a little controversial. I keep the juvenile Bavia robusta, the Diero gecko, and sometimes even baby morning gecko tubes if I have a whole bunch of eggs. And I'll put them all in there together so they
Really?
incubate, and then they all are
That's
just the
damn
same
cool,
size.
man. I
Yes,
think
and so
that's
you have a
awesome.
very tiny, almost like a fish tank. It's like a little world of like 2 or 3 different species, and I do that just for my own sanity. I don't want to have
Yeah.
9 of these things, and each one has a tiny
Yeah.
baby. And then once the robusta actually very quickly become a manageable size where you can grab them and you can put them into like a critter keeper or a
Uh-huh.
tub or something a little bit more sane. And so once they get to that size and they start to kind of bully everything else, then I'm like, okay, you're
Yep.
done. But yeah, I keep all of my baby morning
That's
geckos,
super
and
cool,
yeah,
man. I've
and it
always
keeps them.
wanted to, and it's again controversial, but I've always wanted to build like a giant tank, like 125, something
Yeah,
crazy, and put a few species in there, man. Like these things live on the island together, they revolve
yeah,
together. Like they'll figure it out, right? As long as you're not big enough to eat this one. But I mean, why couldn't I keep a gargoyle, a crested gecko, and a chihuahua all in the same giant planted enclosure, right? They all
yes,
occupy different areas, I guess, right? Different heights,
yes,
different parts of the forest. If the enclosure was big enough, I just think it's one of those things, like we were saying before, that's like an unsaid rule. Like you do not
yes.
mix species. I don't think I know anybody other than maybe Bill Strand has a tank where he has a chameleon, a frog, and a gecko all in the same enclosure. And I think that's awesome.
Well, you know why you don't know is because no one talks about it. It's like hybrids. It's like frowned upon. I promise you, there are many people who do it. I have a couple friends who have amazing multi-species tanks. I mean, we're talking
Really?
like a nightingale with like a basilisk,
Damn,
or
that's
like,
awesome,
and it
man.
actually inspired me to do the same. And so I have one multi-species tank that has been incredibly successful. It's 2 pink tongue skinks. It's a breeding pair, so they occupy the lower levels for the
Uh
most
huh.
part. It's bioactive, it's planted. I have a mop head iguana, captive bred. Those things are cool. I have a Sabonis, Anolis sabonis. That's the Dalmatian anole.
Okay.
And I had the LIGO in there. It was an extra male, so he wasn't breeding with anyone. And I have baby day geckos. I raised them up in there as a nursery. And
That's
sometimes, if they're like large enough, I can move them, right? Because once again, you want them to have access to Pangea. So a lot of these animals are eating Pangea, but they're also eating the crickets, but they're also eating the dog food or cat food that the skinks will eat. And so and it's super bioactive. The springtails are crazy in
yeah.
there. And so for me, that's like a really good way of like, okay, it already has heat, it already has UVB. And once again, the geckos are not fighting because the day geckos only become mean when they're adults. So they're up at the very top.
Uh huh.
The anole and the mop head are on branches, but they're different size and they're not aggressive. And then the skinks are on the bottom layer. Now, this is not something I would like, I'm telling the podcast, it's fine.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
not going
we're
to be
not
posting.
suggesting anybody does this.
We're
We're,
correct. Yeah,
Nate is an extremely experienced keeper.
right,
He's
right,
done this for a very long time. Don't go just putting animals
right.
together. We're just talking.
And it's just for me, right? Like that's usually like I'll put a holdback day gecko in there. These are not the ones that I'm like, if I want to sell something, then it's not going to go in there, right? It's
Yeah.
going to have its own tub, and I'm going to
Yeah.
monitor it. Blah blah
How many
blah.
species? Let's talk about that for a second. I know you said you have to go 8 o'clock, dude. And I could talk to you for hours.
I'll
How
stay for a
how
little bit
long?
longer.
How many species do you bring to a show when you go vend? Are you
That's yeah.
producing
Thank you
enough
for
bovia to sell yet? Are you selling and producing bovias?
Yeah, thank you for asking. It's a great question. And there's definitely people who keep them. I knew a guy in Washington that had like no social media presence, and that's where I got some of my first animals from. Yeah,
Okay.
so when I go to a show, one of the things that really differentiates my table is the variety. If people come
Mhm.
to my table, they're always like, "What is that?" It's almost annoying sometimes. Like I brought a pair of
Awesome.
Pidgey skinks and
Really?
instantly regretted it because every single person was like, what is that? Is it a pine cone? And I'm like, okay, it's kind of fun for the first few and you can share your excitement. But
Yeah,
after like 100 and like maybe, you know, you're kind of hoping to sell them and they're
I
still there,
bet.
then you're kind of like, okay, this is kind of getting like really annoying. Um,
Yeah,
but at every show, I'll have at least one of every new cow that's commonly kept. So I'll have some Chihuahua, some Sarahs,
that's
some
awesome though.
Uris, some Gargs, a whole bunch of Cresties. And then like I'll usually have like a keel-bellied lizard or some sort of lacertid. I'll have a couple species of skinks. I'll have assassin bugs. I'll have beetles. I'll have mantises. I'll have roaches,
That's
and then
badass.
sometimes just like random crap. Like I breed flying geckos, so sometimes those will be on the
Really?
table. Fish scale geckos, and yes, I bring the bavia, and
Dude, that
everybody
is
thinks it's a
badass.
yeah, the bavia people think it's a giant mourning gecko. They're like, what is
Yeah,
this? Is this a
yeah.
mourning gecko? And then yeah, you kind of go through like the education process of like, no, actually, this is a gecko that almost nobody keeps, and this is how
Mm.
you know. And I have customers that have bought bavia from me, and so I assume at some point I'll have like friendly competition, but they live in like other states. But yeah, I usually bring one to a show, and I'm actually about to list a bavia that I produced unsexed and a Diero gecko. So last year was my first year breeding both of them like
That's awesome. That's
regularly.
exciting, man. Someone listen, guys, check Nate's page out, follow him.
Nature Nate.
You're getting an opportunity to get animals that nobody has. Like you have
Yes,
an in right now and an opportunity. How do you say it? Did the D one?
Diero gecko.
Diero. So you guys
Yes.
have an opportunity to get geckos
Yeah.
that literally a handful of people are working with in the States, man. Like, hop on it. He said he's gonna list them.
Yep. Yeah, they're gonna go in Morph Market.
Follow him, check them out.
I used to use Fauna Classifieds. Remember that?
Hmm.
And then
Sure
they
do.
did something with their website last year, and I kind of just never made it back. So now
Yeah.
everything's on Morph Market, and like that's been fun. And then shows and local, and then Instagram is like super fun. And actually,
I'd
this
imagine
year,
that's where do you make a lot of sales on Instagram? You have a big Instagram presence. It's like
yeah,
you have a lot of followers. You have a very personable. You have it.
yeah.
You have it.
It's a complicated answer because we have 12,500 followers, which is not insignificant.
Badass. That's awesome.
But Instagram wants you to pay for reach, so they don't always show my content to even remotely like a third. Like if you have more than 10,000 followers on Instagram, they give you analytics, and so when I post something, I can see how many people saw the post, how many of them were followers, how many of them were not followers, and it's like abysmal. It's like 2 or 3 thousand, and so I don't really want to pay for reach. I just would prefer the Instagram
Keep it
show
organic, man.
would
Yeah.
just show the 12,000 people that follow me my content, and then I would get like a lot more likes and engagement and whatever. I don't know if I care anymore, but yes, I do a good amount of business. Like if you want to get a hold of me, the fastest way is Instagram. I have it on my computer, I have it on my phone. Morph Market is good. Facebook is like another, but that's like more like personal use.
Yeah.
And then a big thing I really want to do this year is actually sort of like Clint's Reptiles, where they do like these are
I
the
love
top
it.
15 pets that no one knows about, but they're phenomenal. And like Frank Payne has done like a really good job
Yeah.
of like a lot of the animals that he works with, and like this is why I keep them. They're very enjoyable.
Yeah.
And so I'll do something that's kind of a hybrid of that this year
That's
on
what you're
YouTube.
doing. I mean, that's how
Yeah.
exactly how I view you. You want to, you have these unique animals that you work with, but you also have these standards that are obviously like transferable to the people that buy them, easily kept,
Yep.
personable, reasonably priced animal. Like I get it. I
Yeah.
get it. I can't even really articulate what I see you're doing, but that's awesome. So
Thanks, man.
what you're going to do a recording like a YouTube? How are
Yeah.
you going
So
to do the
I'm not very good. I've had a YouTube channel for a while, and I even have like one or two really silly videos that actually kind of did really well. I have one of like a silk moth like winking with its antenna, but I don't know how to edit. I'm no good at editing. I can't, drop in all these graphics. So they're gonna be, and a lot of people have done this. So they're basically gonna be like one shots. Even I mean, Clint does a lot of like, there's a lot of like good editing. But basically,
Yeah.
it'll be me in front of a bioactive tank with the animal. I'm gonna hold it and I'll have it stink, and then there's gonna be a one shot. So one take. They're gonna be like 10 minutes long at the most, and then it's just me geeking out about. And I kind of have already. I have like the top. It'll basically be called like Nate's top 15 best pets that you don't know about. And so it'll be like
I'm excited to watch this, dude. I
yeah,
want to
and
see
then
it.
almost all of them will eat Pangea. So it's
Good.
like Cuban false chameleons. It'll be some of the crown giant anoles that are really fun to keep. Garter snakes will be on there because I do work with snakes now, and a lot of people don't know that. And then
Nice. Cool.
what else will it have?
I didn't know that.
It'll have like 6 different skink species for sure, and then it'll have a wide variety of Uris will be like a big focus. Chihuahua will be a big focus. And so, yeah, the theme will just be like most enjoyable pets. Because I really do think that if
That
you
is
don't enjoy
awesome.
it, and you're gonna spend all this time and all this money and like I got a full-time job and a side
Mhm.
hustle and I'm I try to work out when I can and I'm married and it's like okay, I don't have like too much free
Trust me, brother. I'm in the same boat.
time. So it's if you're gonna do this, you really have to have a passion. And for me, if an animal is really skittish and I never see it, and it costs, I need UVB and heat and bugs, and that's all it'll eat, and I can never hold it. I start to get to a point of like, it's actually almost like irritation of like, okay, this is
Mm,
not only costing me time and money, but then there's
yeah.
also
It's not
no
fun.
enjoyment. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not
So,
fun. It's just, and it happens to people, you know. You don't
yeah,
like something, you don't really, you're taking care of it because it's the responsible thing to do, but
right,
it's not a pleasure. I think
right.
if you got more than 10, 15 animals, we've all experienced that. We've bought
Yeah,
something that we were excited about that we soon realized is not
yeah,
bringing us the joy that other things do. I mean, I think it's super common. I think people just don't talk about it much, but I
yeah.
think it happens a lot more than people will admit.
Yeah, and so I've sold some of the rare geckos that I used to keep, like the what's the St. Martin's giant gecko with the spots? Those are cool. That is it? Oh, it's so long. It's like it's like Thecodactylus oscabaccaronium. It's
I
like the
know exactly
longest
what you're
name.
talking. Didn't you have
I have it alone.
Madagascan velvet geckos too?
I've never worked with those actually.
Really? Who? I thought
Those
you
are the
had them. Jay, somebody was buying some from
Oh,
someone. I
sorry. Yes,
thought
I
it was
do.
you.
It's the sorry. I do. I have those. I'm breeding them. The common name is a disaster because velvet gecko can mean like 4 different species. There's
Yeah, you ain't
Australian
lying.
velvet. Sorry, I got confused.
The
Yes, I'm
Tanzania
working with
ones. The yeah.
yeah, actually Jason's getting a proven pair of the Sakalava from me and they're freaking dope. They eat
They're a
Pangea.
cool ass gecko.
They're always out. They love to bask, but
Yeah.
they're active at night. And they're one of those geckos where if you put in the Pangea, because like I work with a lot of animals that eat Pangea, but I
Yeah.
try not to feed Pangea unless they actively eat it. So
Yeah.
it's like an animal that like will eat Pangea, like an
Mhm.
anole. I'm not going to be making Pangea every week for an anole unless I'm going to watch it eat the Pangea. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? That's just a waste of time, money, and energy. But the Blazodactylus are on that food bowl within a minute or two, even if it's the middle of the day. They will be at the bowl and they will like clear it, and I love that because once again, it's the
Cool.
interaction. It's like a tortoise.
Yeah.
You throw in the
Yeah.
greens and they come running, and I
Yeah.
love that.
People don't admit that enough either, Nate. Like when I was a kid, I've kept reptiles my whole life. I'm 41 years old. I was born into a family that had reptiles when I was born. We had a tank on our coffee table in the living room, dude. No exaggeration. My right hand of God, dude. A glass fish tank on the coffee table with a dwarf caiman in it. Like as a child, had a dwarf caiman as a coffee table. Like I could tell you stories you just they're not even believable. So I don't even tell people. But my point is that when I was a kid, I used to buy animals and get animals because of what they ate and how they ate, right?
Mm-hmm,
Does that make any
mm-hmm.
sense to you?
Oh
Like I
yeah,
would buy something because watching it eat was
yes,
awesome. And this
yep,
animal ate this way and ate this, and that was awesome. That eating process is like a big factor in why a lot of people, especially me, a lot of people keep animals, right? You want to see the damn things they eat, whether
yes,
it's Pangea, crickets,
yes.
mice. I mean, you want to see them eat, man. That's half of that's like one of the coolest things about keeping certain species, in
Yep.
my opinion.
Well, it's one of the only times they really do anything, right? Like a lot of
Absolutely.
lizards kind of just sit there and they bask and they're cool to look at, but like that's not that
Yeah,
exciting. And so for me, that's really what got me into like skinks. It's like I can tongue feed just about every
that's
skink I
cool.
own.
You're super
Almost
personable, man.
almost all of them will eat Pangea as a treat and they enjoy it. And I know that they're getting calcium and sugar and
Yeah,
protein
yeah.
in it, which is
Mhm.
great. Yeah, and so yeah, I've moved a lot of my collection over the years into more things that I can tongue feed too. So I have like a trio of like skinks and they go nuts, like the emerald tree skinks and
Yeah.
it's just you get that relationship, and it's so much more rewarding.
I
Because
hear
if I'm
those are
busy,
really cool. How do you
I
like
can just
working
toss
with those? The emerald tree skanks? I hear like people they'll walk right out onto your hand from the cave. Like they're just
Yeah, it
like
makes me
little
nervous.
dogs.
I try not to do it because it makes me too nervous that they're gonna
Yeah.
get if something gets loose in my room,
Mm.
it's really hard to get it again because of the way that the rack system is and it's on carpet, which I don't get me going. There is a I don't really want to move. I put a lot of effort into things, but I've moved a lot over the past few years just for like work and whatever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the ideal reptile room, I'm telling you, is not carpet. You spill that
Yeah.
Pangea, oh, it's a really, really
Uh,
bad day,
I
especially
bet.
on carpet. You're like, how do I
Yeah, back to
wash?
those the Madagascan velvet geckos. Are you selling something that you produced? Or are you selling your collection of them?
That's a great question.
Are
Yeah,
you getting
so
out of them?
he not fully, but he is getting my pair that I've produced quite a few animals from. Yeah, which is crazy, and but I'm stoked because they're gonna do really well in his climate.
Yeah, yeah. He'll do
Um,
good with them. Jason's like very meticulous with keeping his animals, you know.
Yeah, and you think I'd be like really sad about it, right? Because not a lot of people
Yeah,
breed
I
them.
would.
But I once again, it's part of just like the journey that I'm on right now. Is like, okay, I have all these things, and like they do produce for me, and I've
Mhm.
enjoyed them. I'm kind of ready for a new challenge, and then once
Okay.
again, it's like once these are gone, that's a 30-gallon tank that I'm gonna have that's open and it's planted and it's
Do you have any
bioactive.
plans?
Well, if things go well with the tree skinks, then that's probably like a grow out
Okay.
tank or something else. Yeah. And so it's just kind of like, I mean, I'm pretty ADD. So it's like, I try to be responsible, but when my heart is like moving in another direction, then a lot of times I'll slowly move something else out that it's like, okay, I've done this and I feel really good about this and it's gonna go. And that's been really cool. Like I'm also moving my Haemophilus walbergi, which is like an African velvet gecko. They
The
eat
black and white
Pangea.
ones? The ones
Yeah.
from Tanzania?
Yep.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Okay.
Super cool. But their incubation is a nightmare. I mean, it's like 130 days, and like
I
you
hear.
have to
I
keep it
hear.
kind of warm but dry, but not too dry. And like to me, it's like once again, we're bordering on like the level of irritation of like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have
It
this
doesn't
pair
fit
and
the
I
system you got going on. It doesn't fit the flow. I get it. Trust
yep.
me.
Yeah.
I can relate. Let's say that, when something takes something, I control the climate of my room, I control the ambient. So everything I keep needs to fit this,
Yep.
right? If I
Yep.
something, there's a lot of animals I want and I would have, but they don't fit what I'm doing. So I can't. It would be too hard for me to take this environment that I've created and create a different one in the same room. I don't have
Yeah.
multiple rooms, so
Yeah.
it's super understandable. I think a lot of people have problems for that reason. They try to keep animals from 10
Oh
different
yeah.
places all in one area, and you got a jungle setup right next to a desert setup, and you want to know why shit's going wrong. It's obvious to me, but it's
Well,
it's we
it's
could
hard
go
too
on
when
about
you
that for
have
another podcast. What
when
was
you
that?
yeah. Oh, just I was just saying like I really like salamanders. And I used to keep some, but I had to keep them downstairs in a closet and like I really had to keep an eye on like because if you take a salamander much above 73, they start spazzing out pretty bad.
Yeah.
Some of them really bad. And so that was one too where I kind of had to be like, okay, my wife wants this closet back. And like I can't I could not keep them upstairs. I saw them spazzing out even in like winter. The upstairs would get up to like because it's North Carolina, the sun is strong even in the winter.
Yeah.
It'll get up to 80 degrees up here. It did the other day, and I was like, oh crap, I actually have to turn on the
Oh,
AC. It was hitting 83 upstairs. I was like,
wow.
dang. So like that's one too. And then I moved them, right? And so sometimes, yeah, it's just like this is what's working for me right now.
Yeah.
And
And it's
I
better for
just
the
really
animal too. It's better for the animal to get the
mhm,
animal to a place
yeah.
where it's not a inconvenience to someone, where it's easier for them to keep it, like my buddy Matt keeps salamanders too, and he's got a whole designated area of his
Yep.
house to these things, and he keeps all of his Australian geckos upstairs in another room, and it's like it's a you can't. Yeah, I get it. I get it. But it's commendable. It's a noble thing to do. You've
Yeah.
accepted what you're doing, and you have a system. You need to do what's best for you, and what's best for you is ultimately what's best for your animals, right? If you're not in the
Yeah.
right place mentally,
Yep.
and an animal doesn't fit the flow of your
Right.
system you have, because we all have a system when we have this many animals, when it comes to feeding and cleaning and everything else, it's I get it.
And
So
it's one of the things.
I
Oh, sorry, go
go
for
ahead.
it.
I'm giving you one. I know we're coming up. I know you have to leave, and
You're
it's like
fine.
breaking my heart
I
that I'm
got another
keeping you
10. No,
past
keep
8
going.
o'clock, dude.
Keep going. I'm like
So
having a
whenever
good time.
you're done, just be like, I gotta go,
I
and
will. I'll let you know.
totally
It's coming
understandable.
up. I got like another 10. I was just gonna say too, just like a lot of us in this hobby. I think one of the really cool things about this hobby is like I think a lot of us do have ADHD.
I
And so
definitely do.
we're like following sometimes shifting passions, right? And so what I think is really important, right, is you absolutely have to be passionate because I know that pretty much every single one of us that has any sort of collection has experienced burnout where you just don't want to water, you're not feeling it. And so if you're not passionate,
Yeah.
then your animal care is going to get sloppy and like whatever. And so like for me too, it's just like I really want to hop into the room and just be so jazzed about everything that's
Happy.
there. And that has been huge. I've started doing that a year and a half ago, where like, okay, I've looked at my collection. I saw a lot of lone male geckos, and I had them to collect them because I thought it was cool that they ate Pangea, but I wasn't breeding them, so it, like didn't really make like a ton of sense. Like not only from like a business perspective, but also just kind of like, okay, this is a rare gecko. Like it should be bred. Like ethically,
Yeah.
I would actually like to move it out to someone else because I want them to breed it. I'm not going to do it. Like when I had
That's
a rough snout,
noble.
it was very expensive, but I sold it for more than I paid, and it went to someone who had a female. Right? I don't want to
Nice.
just hold up. And so it's kind of the same thing with like the Blazodactylus. I enjoyed them. I
Mhm.
bred them. I sold them. But right now, my passion is just like I want that tank, and I want to
Yeah.
work on something that's like a little bit more. Like the Blazodactylus are hard for me to tongue feed. They've done it, but they're a gecko. They're gonna
Yeah.
scoot. And so right now, I'm more focused on breeding lacertids like keel-bellied lizards, and like that would be a really good fit for that tank. Or the emerald tree skinks, which are super popular and they're amazing. And so like that's kind of the stuff where I'm like, okay, this would actually make like way more sense for me
Yeah.
right now. And once again, it's like, this isn't a flip. It's not like I bought them and like a
Yeah.
month later, I was like, oh, I'm bored. It's like, no, no, no. I've kept them
Now
for
you're doing
years.
super responsible. That's like,
Right.
it's, again, super commendable, man. Super noble to have something that you know should be worked with, but you're not going to. So you get it in the hands of someone that
Yeah.
is. Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Recognizing that something's not fitting your goals. Awesome. You have
Right.
to do that. We have to make adjustments, and you're building a brand. You're building a brand. You're building a business.
Yeah.
You're I love what you're doing, to be honest, with the variety you have and the way you're setting yourself up with your collection. I mean, that's super cool. Very,
Thank
very,
you.
very unique. Very unique.
This
But
one right here are Aussie tree skinks. So I know you had a
really,
really great episode the other day about the Erginia, what is it? The Gidgies.
hmm,
What is their last? Oh, Stokeseye. Stokeseye.
yep, yep,
And then
Stokes.
there's also I have a Cunningham, and I kind of fell in love with that whole complex. I don't have Depressa because they're depressingly expensive. But these are a lot of people don't keep these. These are Agurnia striolata, and they're like emerald tree skinks, but they're from Australia, and they're gray. They're two toned. They're like
Really?
white belly, a black stripe across the eye, and then they're gray on the top. But they eat Pangea, wet dog food, any bug you give them, and they
Really?
live in tree crevices. They call them the tree crevice skink. So that's another one too, where like, okay, I've clearly fallen in love with skinks. So every spare 30-gallon tank that I can have right
Yeah.
now, I kind of want to devote that to the skinks because they know me.
Cool.
They come down when I enter the room. I'm tongue feeding them, or I'll just give them the whole bucket and they just dive headfirst into it. It's pretty
Yeah.
funny. I'll post some
You're a
videos
cool
of this.
animal that would make great pets.
Yeah,
And,
they're
and, and
cool.
and you doing what you're doing is ultimately giving them exposure. You're exposing these super cool animals to the hobby. You have
Yeah,
your following, you're doing your shows, you're
yeah,
getting animals out there. And I know it's controversial, but I feel like the more people that know about them, the more people will keep them, the better off it is for the animals in the long run, right? I mean, it's super cool, man, and they deserve it too, man. Some of these skinks I see, and I don't keep them myself because for obvious situations, but I look at them and I'm like, man, how are these things not more popular? Like these
yeah,
are awesome freaking animals, man. Like
yeah.
super intelligent too. Science is like
Yep.
literally, they study a lot of skinks. Skink intelligence, like skinks are smart, man. They're not like stupid, simple-minded animals. Like skinks are like monitor, and like, skinks are smart.
Yeah, they're crazy smart. I mean, and they're really bold. I've had wild, like out here we have a broadheaded skink. You probably have them too up there.
Yeah.
And there's ones in my yard that if I work with them and I'm patient, they'll climb up my arm to get like a cricket. Like you could feel a wild skink.
Yeah.
It's sort of like some of these curly-tailed lizards. They have a boldness that I think is like really
It's awesome.
admirable. But yeah,
Hell
if anyone's if that's my whole thing. So yeah, most shows I have like 20 different species minimum. And I
You
really
bringing skinks
appreciate
too? Are you selling skinks at the shows? You bringing them?
Yes. And I'm always very transparent. Some are produced by me, and then I also every year will take a group of wild caughts and they go in the quarantine room and I take care of them, I treat them,
Yeah.
and then I provide them as a service, basically. So it's like I took the risk. I brought in
Yeah.
7 Schneider skinks. I hope that they all live. If they die, I'm just out whatever I paid. But then I'll make some of them available as sort of like longer term care.
Yeah.
And then usually in the listing, I'll say, look, this is wild caught, but I've had it for a year and it's doing really well. And so once again, that's one where like, if I can help someone who's new in the hobby not get an animal that's literally fresh off the boat from Africa, it's been established, I've done fecals or I've looked at it and it seems very healthy, then at least like, okay, your chances of this thing dropping dead tomorrow are extremely low, almost as low as a captive bred individual, other than you don't know its age. So and that's something I do. And so I will occasionally get wild caught stuff, but it's going to be on the listing. It's very transparent. And then once again, it's a lot cheaper than, it'll be more than fresh import prices, but less than captive bred.
Which is rightfully so. You took the risk, like you said. You got them established. You got them, and that's.
And I'm not just doing it for fun, right? I'm holding back what I think are going to be the best breeders. So if I get 7 of them and I can clearly tell there's a trio, like I usually will hold that back for my own projects, and then whatever is left over.
Have you ever gotten any wild caught females in that were gravid and laid eggs for you?
Yes. I'm trying to think of if any of them were like noteworthy though. I've had stuff happen, sometimes by accident and sometimes like nothing worth really talking about. But yeah, I've had that happen before and it's kind of fun, but then it's it's captive born. So. Like to me, there's a lot of value in captive born, even though people might not agree with me on this, but it's like, okay, from like a parasite perspective, from a scarring perspective, captive born is still pretty great because it wasn't exposed to all, like I said, all the parasites of the outside world. And it also didn't go through whatever scarring from like bird strikes and other predators.
But it has those strong natural genes, that's nature's, only, the survival of the fittest, if you will, that the parent of that animal is a percentage of animals that made it through freaking hell, right? Like that animal, that's good blood. That the way I see it,
But yeah, nothing that's worth like mentioning. This was more like when I was a kid and you'd get like a wild lizard or like a garter and it produces in captivity for you. And it's like, okay, technically these are captive born, but I did nothing. And I think it's a gray area, right? It's like the monkey-tailed skinks when they say that they're like farm produced. And you're like, I mean, you totally just like, So I think there's like a gray area. And once again, if I sell something that's captive born, I'm also very transparent of like, okay, this thing, I got it in and it immediately laid eggs. It's like, did I breed it? I'm not going to say that I bred it. I will say that it's captive born and like produced by me, maybe. And once again, I think there's a distinction on Morph Market that you can put captive born, not captive born and bred. And so I always make that distinction too. If it happens, awesome. Honestly, a lot of times I just keep those as future breeders because they're very solid animals, right? They didn't have to go through a nasty importation, hot cramped boat in a crate with no water. So it's happened. But once again, it's not something I'm going to brag about.
Random question. But when you bring the skinks to the show, how do you put them on display? Do you, like you would put a gecko in a deli cup, I guess. Do you shoot those big 12-inch round ones? How do you display them at the shows?
So I'll have big deli cups, and then you keep them on mulch instead of paper towel. So like the skinks will totally just like bunch up the paper towel pretty bad. So I try to keep them on mulch, and that allows you to see the color of the skink. But also give them, because they don't have sticky pads, so it gives them the kind of like stability to like feel like there's ground underneath them. But they're pretty funny.
They get a lot of attention. Are they moving at shows? Are you moving a lot of skink?
Yeah. They're very active. Yeah. So, and then
What about
this,
your keeled bellies? Are you selling a lot of those too at your shows? What are people
no.
buying the most when you go to a show? What's your hot items?
Oh, it's so hard to say. I always move. The benefit of what I do is that you can't go wrong with diversity, right? So, like, if you only
No,
did
you damn
Cresties
sure can't.
and you have a show that's a lot of Cresties, then you might not sell anything at all because the market was saturated and like your stuff might be too expensive or whatever. When you have diversity, I'm not saying I'm killing it. Like, there's a lot of shows where I only make a couple $100s, and like that is debatably not worth my weekend. But I am gonna move some animals. To be honest with you, the skinks do really well. The zebra skinks are my favorite, and they're such insanely underrated, phenomenal pets. You can
Zebra skinks? I don't even know if
Yep.
I know. What's the scientific name for those?
Trachylepsis dichroma. I'll pull up a picture. They're amazing. They're live bearers, which is a favorite of mine. I
I was
hate
just gonna
incubated.
ask that, man. How many
Yep.
live bearing species are you working with?
A ton. It's
Really?
become a major focus of mine. I
would-
don't have an incubator. I know they're not that expensive, but they fail. They stress me out. I don't want to do
Oh,
it.
they're cool, dude.
Isn't that funny? I'm so lazy. I have like, a wide collection, and I'm so weird about certain things. I don't want an incubator. I feel like they're going to be like a fire hazard or they're just going to die. Here's a great picture. I mean, look at that male is incredible. So they're sexually dimorphic. So that's a male. That's an adult male.
Okay.
And then the females retain the zebra pattern of the babies. And so when they're born, pretty early on, they start to differentiate. And so I can sex them pretty early. They're live bearers. They'll they'll give birth to up to
This one's showing
as
four
it's
babies.
4 to 9. They can have a big litter.
Wow.
And so they eat
Dude, that
wet.
makes me wanna, man. I want a live bearing
Get some
species
from me.
so
Get some from me.
freaking
They're the
bad,
best.
dude.
So here you go. That's the male with the orange coming in. These are juveniles. And then that's the female with the more stripy zebra pattern. And what's really cool is they can live as a family unit. So the babies can live with mom and dad. They can live together. They eat Pangea. They eat wet cat food. They eat any bug. And right out of the egg, and I keep saying the egg, right out of the womb, they can you can hold them. They're like very personable. They do need heat, which sometimes will turn people off if you're coming from kind of like more of like the
How hot would you say? You need like a basking area
95,
or just full ambient?
95 to 100. Like, let them cook, in a spot. And I do think UVB would be a really wise.
Where are they from? Africa?
Kenyan zebra skink is their full name or common name. So yeah, you find them in Kenya. They're freaking cool. And what's crazy is like there's other Trachylepsis, so the same genus, that lay eggs instead of our live bearers. And that's pretty wild that within the same genus, because half of all skinks are live bearers and the other half lay eggs. So like blue tongue skinks are live bearers. Ocellated skinks, which I also breed, are live bearers. But fire skinks lay eggs. And so there's another Trachylepsis called the African lined skink. And they look like the East Coast skinks. They've got a blue tail. They're black and white with stripes. And those all lay eggs. The broad-headed skinks lay eggs.
I was just gonna ask. The ones near us lay eggs. These ones out here. Yeah.
And so that was when you were asking me, have you ever had anything produce in captivity? And yes. But I had a really hard time keeping them alive. It's a conversation for a different time. But they seemed very sensitive to hydration. Too much and too little bit me on both ends for incubation and when they hatch. But look at this. This is on my Instagram. And this is a whole bunch of baby Kenyan zebra skinks.
Yeah, dude, that's freaking cool, dude.
Yeah, they're freaking
that's real cool. That's
they're dope. Best pet. And I say this at shows. I tell everyone, they're like, "What is this?" And I said, "It's the best pet that nobody knows about."
Really? See, because that's going to be. I'm going to give you the chance when we end this. I have a good question for you.
Okay.
That's awesome.
They're freaking dope.
Have you ever thought about keeping the monkey tail skinks?
So I have one of a lone male.
Do you really?
Yeah, I do. I could, if I wasn't on my computer, I would take you to see it.
That's
so I have one.
Cool.
I got a hell of a deal. Once again, I have my hard rule of they go for 1,200 wild caught, which is bananas. Man. Yeah, and I had a really good buddy of mine. He just needed some money, and I was like, okay, if you make me a deal, I'll pay you cash, and we'll get this done. And so I got it for considerably less than $1,000, which is awesome. And I was kind of okay, this is my biggest reptile. It's going to need a ton of space. but everything I had seen told me that I wanted to do this. And those are live bears, right? And so then they eat plants, which is really cool. And not a lot of
Super
skinks
cool.
will eat exclusively vegetation. And so yeah, I got this thing. It's in a massive, I mean, it's like 120 gallon, something like that. It's like a really large tank. And it's just got 2 vertical branches with cork rounds built in, and then I custom made the wall, and it's got cocoa
Really?
fiber. They eat Pangea. They'll eat pieces of fruit. You can feed them like watermelon, cantaloupe, all kinds of guava, I think. And then I just
That's
feed them like
awesome.
lettuce and like random stuff. And it's so, oh my gosh, dude, they're so personable. If you come into the tank, they go like this. It's actually really intimidating. And they do it like that, where it's like sort of spastic, and then they come forward and they kind of drift, and then they do it again. And so it's like really weird when I come in there, and I do not want to get bit because they have serrated teeth. That's how they eat pothos in the wild. So you can actually feed them. I propagate pothos. You
Cool,
can
me
feed them
too.
freaking pothos, which are toxic to cats and dogs. Like you cannot. I
Wow.
cannot eat. If I eat this, I'd probably get sick. But they can eat
Really?
them, and they do in the wild, in the Solomon Islands. And what's really cool about them, I know I'm geeking out here, but the Solomon
Please,
Islands is one of the
please
only
do.
places on Earth that stays almost exactly constant 80 degrees, where there is no night drop, there is no seasonal variation. They're literally 80 degrees, high humidity year round. There is
They're gonna be
no.
like right on the equator or something.
Absolutely. Yeah, they are. And so that's like super freaking cool. And I have kept, up until very recently, a trio of Solomon Island tree skinks, which are the emo tree skinks.
Uh-huh.
It's the same deal. I just like,
I think
I
they're
try,
awesome too, though.
I
I
keep them
think
in the
they're
hottest
super
room.
cool.
But the monkey tails are dope. They will cut you up bad because they have it's not on purpose, but they have huge nails. And like,
Huge.
I've never been bit. It's a lot of like kind of bluffing. Like when they do this,
Hmm.
they're kind of like testing you or just seeing what you are.
Yeah,
But people have gotten bit, and I bet it sucks.
really. So I've never heard a bad thing about them. I actually,
No, they're dope.
to me,
They're
they're
dope.
one of those like bucket list animals. Like that's one of those
It was
you
mine
know
until last year when I made
the
it happen.
golden that's
Yeah.
like the it animal to have. Like
Yes.
that's they have a very elite status, if you will. They're, to
I
me,
mean,
they're like right with the earless monitors and
yes. Yeah.
Boland's pythons. Like they have that same elite status. Maybe you can get them for a little cheaper than that, but they
Yep.
still have a. I've never
Well,
heard a person say a bad thing about them. Like I've
mm-mm.
only ran into people that have good things to say about them or dream of keeping them. Like,
Yeah. Even wild caught, they're extremely hardy. I mean,
mm,
they're sort of like the Indonesian blue tongue skinks, where like I don't love that they're imported. And to be honest with you, we're very close to the end of importation of monkey tails.
really,
We're very close, and that's probably a good thing because they just are not doing well in the wild due to deforestation and the importation process. Poaching is like a huge deal. But if you get them, even if they're wild caught, they're pretty damn hardy. And then, like I said,
mm,
they're relatively, the biggest thing with skinks that I think people don't get into them is that they're almost impossible to sex. So the one I got was paired with another one and they never produced, right? Which either tells you it's a male female that didn't want to mate, or it was a male
probably.
male, female female, probably most likely female female.
To
No one
say probably
knows.
both girls. Yeah.
And so sometimes the only way you can really sex these things is actually to take it in for like an MRI and do like a radioscopy.
Really?
And you can actually see the hemipenes. I know people who have done this for blue tongues. And it's the same thing with blue tongues, right? Like they're sort of sexually dimorphic in the head shape. But that's not a good way to do it because I've done that and I've been wrong.
Well,
The only
that's
way
an
it's almost like the only way you can know.
expensive experiment.
Well, that's the thing, so, right? So if you want a pair of monkey tails, you're looking at a minimum of probably $2,000, which so the monkey tails is really cool that I have one because I
Very
grew
cool.
up 2 blocks from the Seattle Woodland Park Zoo, and I used to work there, and they had one
Really?
of the best reptile houses. It actually burned down, which is crazy sad. While I was living pretty close by,
Did they
and
get the animals? Did they save the animals?
almost everything died. Yeah, it sucked. It was the worst, and some of them were obviously endangered. They had some crazy rare stuff. But seeing that on display, and then the fact that I have one and I'm keeping it in a larger tank than they were keeping it
Hell yeah.
is it blows the levels of imposter syndrome that I feel sometimes. And so for a long time, it was totally unattainable because I just, like I said, I have a hard, it's kind of funny. We talked about it earlier, but we're coming back. I have a really hard and fast rule where just personally,
Mm.
everyone thinks I'm like a big time deal. I'm actually very much not. And so I have some pretty hard rules budgetarily of like, I cannot go over $1,000 on one animal. And so I always thought they were going to be outside of my range, or like maybe someday if I was retired and I could budget for this. But then this opportunity came to get it for like a lot less. And so I was like, okay, fine, then we're going to do it. And I got this tank like very shortly after and it worked out.
Yeah,
And I think that's
sometimes stuff
part of
like
the
that
reason
just
too.
happens, man. It fits what
But,
you're doing, though. You know, it's you got to
right,
have a little. You know, you got your animals that are obviously bring you joy, but there's nothing
right.
wrong with you having a species or two that are like your personal
Pets.
things,
Oh, I have
right?
a ton of lone males. It's so bad. But that's why people sometimes are like, oh, I saw you're selling your like Blazodactylus. Are you getting out? It's like, not totally, but I do need the money to fund some of these other. And that was a big, this year I sold a lot of rare lone
Yeah, you
males,
did.
like the rough snout and the Thecodactylus. And what that allowed me to do was to pay for this monkey tail. And I'm
Where'd
going to
the
be
rough snout
honest,
go?
huh?
Who did you sell the rough snout to?
I'm text me after, and
All
I'll
right.
tell you why after. I'm just not sure if he wants me to say because he picked it up and like it was expensive, and I think is getting out of the hobby. I just don't want to put him on blast if he's not. I'll text you.
I dream of those things, man.
They're
Like I
freaking
said,
cool. They're little,
I'm
little mean, little flighty. They're a
really.
little bit
You
like the
have a
Sarah.
lesser? Did you have a lesser?
It was, oh yeah, I paid less than $1,000, but it was still a lot. So
No, I'm saying, did you had a lesser
it
or
was a
the
lesser.
great?
Yeah. Well, because I laugh because the greater are like 3,600 each or something crazy. I could never afford a grader. No.
The
But that's a
interview, I
big
know
thing
nothing
too.
about him, like I said, but Thursday I'm interviewing the Rocks Gecko, and he breeds both of them.
Right.
I'm like just dumb. I look at them, and they have the same elite status as the monkey tail to me. They're right
Oh,
up there
sure.
with those animals. They're like,
They're cool as
I
hell.
don't know that I could
Yeah.
not even
I
get the
could,
money because God knows I make the money. Not to sound smug, but it's spending it right. Like I have a
right.
limit in the morals where I'm like,
Right.
I got a family, dude. I have a wife. I can't just go and spend
Yes.
5 grand on an animal and
Yes.
expect everybody to be okay with it. Like I have
Yes.
a
And
house
that's
to take care of.
a mortgage, right? Yeah. So and I don't want to come off as like, because for me, it's absolutely not all about the money. I think one of the coolest things about this hobby is that instead of like, if I was into like pimping out Miatas, I would just, it would just be like a money, or if I bought like a Tesla Cybertruck, maybe I could do it, but it would really put me in the hole. The cool thing about this hobby is like through the Cresties and some of the stuff that I breed, I'm not even like, honestly, I don't even think I'm really profitable most years, but I'm breaking even. And that in itself is pretty cool that I can sell some animals that I, paid for a long time ago. They're worth more now because they're adults or they're proven. And then I get that money back. And I'm like, sweet. So now I have a budget, right? And that's how I got the monkey tail. That's why on Morph Market right now, you're seeing me sell some of these rarer. It's like I'm selling geckos that either I don't see as often as I'd like to justify their continued rent in my house,
Yeah.
or I feel like I've done it and I've really enjoyed it and I'm ready to move on to this new thing. But until that tank is free, until that heat lamp is free, that outlet or the money is available, now I can move on to something that I'm going to be even more jazzed. And like, believe me, brother, the monkey tail, it's like, if people ask me, like, if you could only keep one thing, it would be like a Chihuahua, it'd be a Cuban false chameleon, be that freaking monkey tail, and like, I don't know, it'd be some of the emerald tree skinks. Like if I could only keep 4 or 5 animals, if I was like dying of cancer in a hospital, I'd have a tank with a Chihuahua in it. You know, I told my wife that. I was like, I would have a Chihuahua next to the hospital, to the bedpan. It
No,
would
not
be
even a question. Chihuahua's mine too.
You're amazing.
Like
The personality, the color, the
my
handleability,
go-to favorite
the
animal. I've got
best.
32 of them now. I mean, they're
Dude, I went crazy this year because the
love them.
price came way down, and so I finally was able to get like a group of them, and I wanted to be like really serious about breeding them too. And the white collars that used to be like 15 grand, you can now get a baby white collar for like $400, which is like, dude, go mow some lawns. You can afford that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's gonna be the slogan on the back of my shirt because I have a lot of people message me. I'll kind of like end on this. or get close to the. I do got to go in like a couple minutes here, but people
Totally
will
understand.
this is a pet peeve. Don't do this. People will message me and I'm holding a fossil. This is a fossil
It's
terminal.
badass. I have them
People
all around my
message,
room too.
oh yeah, I got
But
a little stone collection on the
no
little.
shit, man. We got a
Yeah,
lot
yeah.
of things in common, kid.
Yep,
That's
yeah, dude.
awesome.
I want to meet you at a show up north someday.
Absolutely. I have my rainforest right there where I grow all my plants. Love plants,
Yeah,
man. I have all my fossils. Like,
yeah. I got like
it's
coyote
crazy.
skull and all kinds of whatever.
That's
But
badass.
people message me and they're like, "Are you open to trades?" And it's like, first of all, don't ask, "Am I open to trades?" Just lead with, "I have this." Because then what's crazy is I will say, "Maybe. What do you have?" And then they'll say, "What do you want?" And I'm like, "Okay, we were wasting a lot of time here that you could have just skipped." And then, like, to be honest, I really don't want trades because, as we've already established, almost everything I work with, other than the Cresties, is rare. Like
Mhm.
I almost keep. I don't have a ball python. I don't have any. I almost don't have anything other than the Cresties, which is fun for me. I
Yeah,
like dowels and lilies and
yeah.
darks and cappuccinos. Other than the
They
Cresties,
support everything you do on bad years, man. No matter what, they
exactly,
move, man.
exactly. It's
So,
operational cost. But I don't keep basic animals. And so when someone comes to me and they want a Leachianus or a rough snout gecko,
mm,
and these are animals that cost $1,000 at adult size or more, and they're coming at me with like a PetSmart crested gecko or a leopard gecko or like a ball python or a corn snake. It's actually a huge insult to the
yeah, I
amount of
was just gonna say
money
it's
and time
insulting.
and care. And then once again, if you're going to do that, because I have taken trades, but what I'm looking for is so rare, you probably don't have it. And
Mhm.
I've only had like two exceptions, and Jason is one of them. He approached me about, and I'm sure he's fine with me saying this. He
Yeah,
approached me about the velvet geckos because he was like, it's money, right? It costs money, and they're not cheap. They're rare, so it was like $350, $400 for the
mm,
pair, and I think that's pretty reasonable. He said,
mhm.
"Would you trade for some Chihuahua?" I was like, "Yes," because Chihuahua are rare and they're not cheap, and I don't breed a lot of them. And so to me, that was like
Oh, so
absolutely,
you're getting that pair from him? I wanted that pair
yeah, yeah,
myself,
yeah. I'm
man.
pretty. It was a pretty fair deal for both of us.
That male dude,
Yeah,
yo,
and I was stoked
he's
to.
dude, he's
I was.
fire. He's from Richie too. I think Richie produced him, man.
These are
He's
actually juvies.
huh?
These are actually. I'm getting juvies. I'm getting young juvies from him.
Oh,
They're not
all
older
right,
than a
all
year.
right, all right.
But I love that it's going to a buddy of mine. And once again, it's the mutual level of respect. He didn't come to me with a $40 spotty, no crested gecko from PetSmart. He was like, "These are high value animals. Your animals are also high value and rare." And so I was thrilled to make. I love Chihuahua. You know what I mean? And so like, and then the fact that it's going to him, if I ever want them back, or if I want some babies that they're going to produce, because they're laying right now, like he's going to be producing them. I cooled them down for winter. I know where I can get them, and I love that too. It's not going to like an unknown.
Yeah, that's awesome because I know I'm getting them now.
Yeah, yeah, they're great. They're great, and I sold the babies like so cheap. Sometimes people will sell them for like 150. I was selling mine for like
Really?
$80. I mean, stupid cheap. $100. And they
Uh,
didn't always move. They would just sit on Work Market. And I'm like,
Not to
really?
sound smug, but my cheapest animal, maybe $700. I got some of these
Oh,
Chihuahuas, those
really?
babies. I spend a
Yeah.
lot of fucking money, man.
I'm telling you though, this is Murphy's Law. Now that I'm giving them to Jason, I promise you because we're definitely coming very close also to a Madagascar importation ban.
I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah, I
They're
hope so too.
killing that fucking island, man.
Yes, it's gonna happen. And as soon as it does, Jason's like couple $100 geckos are gonna be worth like $1,000, and I'm gonna be kicking myself. Because once again, it's not about the money, but it does fund my activities.
He probably won't
So
even charge you, man. Like he
I
always
mean, maybe
wants to give me animals, and I'm like, Jay, I'm not taking no animal from you unless you let me give you money, bro. Like I'm not.
I'm probably sitting on a couple eggs. I let them incubate in the tank, and so if they hatch, like I'm not selling him eggs, so like I'll hold some back. I'm
Do
not
they
getting.
glue
Oh
them? Are they gluers? Do they glue to the glass?
yeah, they're kind of weird. They bury, but
Really?
they're kind of hard shell, like a day gecko.
Hmm.
So you can hold it, but you can also smush it. You have to be careful; they'll crack. And I actually, yeah, I always incubate them in the tank. I've pulled them out before if I can find them,
Mm-hmm.
but digging for them in the way that I have my setup is actually kind of gravelly. So
Okay.
digging for them is a risk to the eggs because I
Yeah.
might move a rock that's fatally scratches an egg. I've
Absolutely.
incubated them in Pangea hatch. It's just like whatever temp. They do hatch. It's fine.
Good. I think it can be done with a lot more species than people do.
Yeah.
I genuinely believe like most of these animals are living in trees or laying their eggs at the bottom of these trees. Where are those
Right.
baby geckos going when they get out of the tree? They're going up the tree. You mean to tell me
Yes.
that every parent gecko is eating the baby? We'd have no geckos in the wild. Like,
Right. Right. And I also let my eggs have I really got to go, but they
all
have
right,
I let all my eggs have a night drop too.
me
Because in
too.
the wild, even if they're buried underground, the ground
Absolutely.
temperature does change at night.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and there's
All right.
nothing wrong
So
with that.
let everybody know I got time for my one last
Yeah,
question
yeah.
for you is if you could suggest one pet, one obscure animal that nobody knows about that would make a great animal, great
Yeah.
pet for somebody, an animal that would make a great pet for somebody, what animal would you suggest someone has that nobody keeps?
Yeah, absolutely. Trachylepsis dichroma, the Kenyan zebra skink. They can
Awesome.
eat a wide variety of food. They need a heat lamp, but it's not insane. They're live bearers. If you want to breed, you don't have to incubate.
Awesome.
And the babies are stupid cute and really bold and really handleable. It's everything you would want in a pet. Like
That's awesome.
literally, their tail regrows if they drop it, which they're not very inclined to do. And if you like a little bit of variety, the males are bright orange. They look totally different than the females. So like literally what more could you want in a reptile other than being room temp? And that would
They
be
are
boring.
awesome.
So yeah, that's definitely and
Awesome.
I'll be listing, I don't know. I produce some and I get some from friends of mine. And so that's something that will also in the next
Awesome.
couple of months, I actually just sold a whole bunch of them, but I'll have more on my morph market soon. Probably in the next
Guys,
couple.
check out Nate's Morph Market. Follow him on Instagram.
Yep.
If you don't, everyone that I know follows him. Check him
Nature.
out. Kid's got a lot of cool things going on.
Thanks.
Follow him on Instagram. Like I said, you'll probably see the shows he's going to, where he's going to be, what venues he's
Yep.
at. Check out his availability on Morph Market. Great kid, runs a great business.
Thank you.
Definitely takes care of his animals.
Oh yeah.
Is there anything I didn't say? Is there anything else you want to let people know?
No, that's nature _Nate _geckos. It's the same almost everywhere. So I don't really do TikTok, but I'll have YouTube videos soon, and I'll post that on my Instagram. I'm also on Palm Street. That's the only other one I'll say is I have one of the
Awesome.
most diverse palm streets out there, just for the same reason of just like I'm just too ADD to just stick with one species.
That's great, man. Real reptile enthusiasts love going to a show and walking up to a table and seeing variety. There's nothing worse than walking
Absolutely.
into a show and seeing ball python, crested gecko, ball python, crested gecko. Like people want to go into a
Right.
show and say, "What is that?" I know it
Yep.
could be annoying, but that's what real enthusiasts want. You want to walk up to a table and say, "What the hell is that?"
Absolutely.
You got it going on, kid. Again, I appreciate you coming by, man. So much respect and love for you, Nate, man. Honestly,
You
man,
too,
it's just
man.
a total pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me again on the podcast. I love it. Keep killing it because I listen while I'm feeding my animals.
Thank you. Thank you for the support, brother. All right, guys. Have a great night. Have a great morning. Whenever you listen to this, stay positive. Enjoy your animals. Catch you in the next one. Peace. Dude, I appreciate you so much, man. I'm sorry
Oh
we went
yeah,
past the time, dude. I
that's
feel
fine.
so terrible, but